How's it going, everybody? Happy Wednesday. If you're on here, please hit that like button. Hit the like button, tag anybody on this discussion, share it with someone that you think may find it interesting. I'm excited about today's combo. This has been long, long, long in the making. um, it should be fun. I'm going to be talking with special guest Mr. Obsidian. We're going to be going over his book, the Book of Obsidian, the ladies edition, and other trending news happening in the Black love dating and mating market. So this should be fun, guys. Be sure to show support. As always, you can find me on CASHAPP or VENMO Chez Chardé, and I will be sure to acknowledge our super chat. So without wasting time, I'm going to bring him up, and we'll get started. Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Great. How you feeling?
I'm good.
Yeah, I took the unusual step of taking a nap today, so I feel great.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, I'm excited about this conversation. I know it's been a long time in the making.
Yeah, lot going on since we talked about setting this.
Yes, quite a bit. I was trying to think about the best way to kind of tackle this because I know there's a lot of content in your book. So as natural, I took notes. I have like two different places I took notes. One on my computer, some others on just pieces of paper, just because I'm a bit all over the place when it comes to that. But
I understand completely. I'm like, I call it the hell room because it's hot as hell in here. Got all this sound inhalation on the wall. So in my hell room, it looks like a tornado hit because I got paper everywhere. With pieces of strips of paper, back of an envelope, notepads, clipboards, books. So I got a whole lot. So I know exactly what you mean. Something comes to you and you jot it down, and yeah, that's how I did the book.
Makes sense.
I did the book exactly like that.
Well, because I feel like inspiration. When you're a creative person, you can't necessarily control inspiration. It just kind of comes sporadically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's things you can do to try to help spur it on, but it's like it just comes, and so when it comes, you just kind of have to go with it.
Yep. And that's how I did the book. The book came about as a result of me just jotting down notes and stuff like that, and then I pulled it all together. So that was that was kind of like the creative process of it. I pulled it all together and put it into a folder, and that folder consisted, like I said, scraps of paper, Post-it notes, back of a receipt envelope, as well as like actual sheets of printer paper where I write down stuff, type notes, all kind of stuff, scribbles, all kind of stuff. I put it all in, and as a matter of fact, I still have that folder because the book was supposed to be exactly like the book about the second book we're talking about tonight. The ladies edition of the Book of Obsidian. I call it my Oops Baby Red book. It was supposed to be exactly like the first book, the Book of Obsidian. And that was 42 chapters. So I was supposed to make it the same length, but I didn't have the time. So I kind of cut it short at 27 and said the rest of the material I'm gonna have to come back in another edition. If there's another edition, I have plenty of material to work with.
Understandably so. I mean, in my estimation, and correct me if I'm wrong, in my estimation, I mean, you covered off a lot of bases. So I'd be curious what other topics you would want to address because I feel like it was pretty thorough.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to cover was this word dusty.
Oh, fair point. Fair point.
Yeah.
There could be a whole book on that. I feel like.
What was that? Say what?
I said I feel like there could be a whole book on that, truthfully.
Yeah. I wanted to cover that. I wanted to cover the relationship Black women have with the contemporary Black church. I wanted to touch on that. And I wanted to touch on some things that my approach to writing these books was kind of lifted from I don't know if you watch police procedurals. I'm a big fan of Law and Order, so he's been around for a long time, And the whole premise behind Law and Order is that it's ripped from the headlines, right? So their shows, while fictional, are based on real life events, and those real life events are topical. As a matter of fact, if you watch the shows, I know I have, I watched the shows over the years, and I was like, oh, they're talking about that case that happened in the news, So that was kind of my approach, was to, because I noticed a lot of Black love authors, what they will do is give you their opinion. And I'm not saying people's opinions are wrong or bad, but what I am saying is that we need more than just opinions. So
Agreed.
I put the issues and the facts before my opinion, and then I give my opinion. So I give you, and I said, well, maybe the best way. Another thing I found too about a lot of Black love authors, a lot of it is theoretical, what they have to say. So they give you their opinion and they'll give you their theory on it. But you don't actually see much in the way of real world application of it. You don't see much any real world backing with it. So what I do is I talk about stuff that happened in real time, and then I give you the facts pertaining to that and the research, and then I give you my opinion on it.
No, I think I wish more things came, I guess, from that angle, like more of these conversations, especially as it relates to dating and relationships in the Black community. We should be talking more about facts and not just simply anecdote or, how I feel, because look at where that's gotten us. Yeah. So I will take facts all day, every day over just entertaining, story that's going to make me feel good and maybe, get the cash apps up, but that's not going to lead to any results.
What do you think that is? Let me ask you a question. Why do you think? Well, let me ask you this: how many Black love books have you read?
Oh, that's a good question. If I'm being honest, I think I've tended to read more like Christian-based love books now, or just Christian-based relationship books in general. If I'm being honest, now some of them have been written by Black authors, some of them have not. Right. It's been a while, but gosh, I'm trying to think. The last one that I remember, and it was an audiobook, but the last one I remember listening to was, what's that one with Devon Franklin and Megan Good? I can't think of the name. The Wait. Yes. That was the last one that I remember reading. Now, to be fair, at that point, I was already, with my husband. So I was more reading it as kind of like a, as an observer. I wasn't reading it like trying to get tips and curiosity. Just to be quite frank, by that time I kind of saw the game for what it is. Mm-hmm. I understood how things worked in that market and how unfortunately pandering happens to women within the church. So I was interested to see whether or not that book had legitimate points or whether or not it was going to be just another pander.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So did you think it was just another pandering book, or what did you think?
Honestly, I saw it being filled with a lot of, cute ideas and feel good motivations, but it was lacking when it came to, I felt like the statistical evidence. I think it was lacking, in my personal opinion, on real practical things that someone could do. And more importantly, how somebody who find themselves in the scenario that like most Black women do can actually navigate.
Yeah.
To me, it seemed very idealistic. But I'm like, the women who are usually reading those books tend not to be in ideal scenarios. So that's where I think, and granted, I don't think I got like almost to the end, and then I just kind of like was just kind of over it, honestly. But what I did read, I felt like, okay, it was just idealistic at best. That's the best way I could put it.
Yeah. I've never read the book, so to be fair, I don't want to discuss something I haven't read. But what I will say is this: that it is interesting that and they made it just under a decade. It is interesting to look back. The marriage didn't work, and I'm wondering, and it's interesting to me about that, because they being Devin Franklin and Megan Good, they don't seem to get the same type of workout that other people in the Black love space seems to get. One thing I noticed that when I got into this whole thing, and I kind of figured it was coming because nobody saw me as a lovable or relatable kind of guy in that sense.
Fair.
I was kind of seen as and maybe you agree or disagree with this, but a lot of people saw me as kind of like fire and brimstone when it came to Black women. I just hated all things Black female and so forth. So I accepted that I was an unlikely source for what essentially amounts to Black love, just aimed originally at Black men. And so I understood that I was going to get some. Well, what's the deal with you here? How do you what marks you out as somebody to be able to be credible about this and so forth? So I kind of understood that and accepted it.
Right.
But I find it interesting that in the year or thereabout since their breakup, so it hasn't even been a year if I remember right. Nobody has come after them. Nobody has said, the weight was a fraud. Nobody said, nobody in contemporary Black American life is saying that. It's just, just keep right on getting up without skipping the beat. Meanwhile, I'm getting all kind of, you had my first book. I had to devote 2 chapters to answering questions essentially as to, why me,
Yeah, what did you call? I remember that. I recall that chapter specifically because I thought it was I loved how you broke down how qualifications, quite frankly, don't matter, because if they did, we would have better results because you would have qualified people leading the conversation when it comes to dating and relationships. And far too often that is not the case. So I thought it was brilliant how you kind of broke down, really, quite frankly, the hypocrisy in that.
Yeah. And it really does come down to a personal or what people, in this case, Black men, to tell you the truth. I can't even lay this at the feet of Black women because the book wasn't aimed at Black women, it was aimed at Black men. It really does come down to, for many Black people, I think the reason why we approach things the way that we do is because the personal really matters a lot. Black people have to have at least what they perceive to be a personal relationship with you. Either, and by that I mean, they may not necessarily know you or anything like that, but they have to feel like they know you. They have to be able to relate to you. So I'm going to mention some names here, not to disparage, but to illustrate. So a lot of Black men relate to alpha male strategies.
Okay.
They either see themselves in him or they see what they can aspire to be in him.
Okay.
Alan Roger Curry is another example. A lot of Black men can relate to him. Again, either they see themselves in him or they see someone that they can be in him. Ron Wills, once again, same again. This is somebody been around for a very long time, and they can see themselves in him, or the man that they can aspire to be. I think the personal relationship piece is what really matters to Black people, in this case, Black men. And I think that the same thing applies on the other side with Black women. A lot of Black women, now this is interesting because there aren't many Black women who write on Black love topics for Black women.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned in my research for my first book, and does play a big role in the writing of the second, is that Black women don't really like getting their relationship advice from other Black women.
No, they don't.
Particularly if those Black women are better in some sort of way. So, if they're really attractive, and married, if they're really attractive and married to clearly above average. He may not be flat out high value. That's the term these days. He may not be flat out high value, but he's clearly not the run of the mill garden variety brother out here. A lot of Black women don't really want to hear from them on that, to tell you the truth. So the Black love genre, and I talked about this in the first book, and I follow it up in the second book. And I did it like that on purpose. The 2 books, though aimed at different audiences, can be kind of joined together into one coherent whole. You can kind of go from one book to the other and kind of see, the connections between the 2. At least that was my intention. Maybe you didn't see it that way because you have both books, but that was my intention. My intention was to write it in such a way that they can stand alone as separate volumes, but you can also kind of join the two pieces together and kind of see the interplay between the two.
Well, this actually brings up two questions. I mean, because there was a couple of things that obviously came up for me, reading this book. But one of them was why, going back to the point that you made, that a lot of Black women don't necessarily want to take relationship advice from other women who have the results that they say that they want.
Right.
I mean, I can just see this anecdotally based upon the disparaging terms like pick me and mammy and all the stuff women in the Black YouTube space get, who actually have relationships and talking about how to maintain that. How they get shamed. And it's so like interesting to think that here's something that you want, and here are women who actually have what you say that you want. But when it comes to getting advice, you'd rather turn to a woman with no results. And it always, to this day, it perplexes me. It's like, what is it? Is it ego? Is it, you really define yourself? Is it feeling like you can't actually have the results that woman has? So it's better to just shame them. Like, what is it? Is it a combination of both? So that's always something that has interested me. Why somebody who wants results is not willing to go to a person that has been proven to get those results.
Yeah.
Like,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Just want to make sure that I'm getting some slight feedback. In any event, what was interesting about that? So, like I was saying before, one thing I learned is the personal relationship piece. For a lot of Black people, data is impersonal, and to be brutally frank, seen as white. Okay. So somebody like me, who is very heavily data driven, is seen as essentially being white for the most part. Black people, and this is true for Black men too. I'm not beating up Black women here. This is a Black experience. For Black people, the personal experience is paramount. So to answer your question about, okay, so why are so many of these sisters paying attention to sisters who, clearly don't have relationship results and so on and so forth? Because they can personally relate to them. Man, how many Black women can relate to somebody that has a strong marriage in Black America? We just talked about Devin Franklin and Megan Good. They didn't even make it 10 years. So, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the average Black marriage it lasts 5 years.
Okay. Oh, I was not aware of that.
Yeah. The average Black in the United States overall, regardless of race, just averaging it out for everybody, it lasts 8 years. But for Black Americans in particular, it lasts 5 on average. Most Black women today have never been married. Okay. The average, the median age of a Black woman is about 36. So we're talking about Black women in the main that's the idea of being married, especially for any length of time, that's just not within their day-to-day purview.
Okay.
So they can more easily relate to a Black woman who has, to be brutally frank, very bad experiences with Black men.
Yes.
Who've been married. We're going to be talking about a lady who fits this mold very well. And it makes sense why that lady and others like her would do well with Black women insofar in a social media age, because she's more relatable. A lot of Black women can't relate to a Black woman that's been married for a length of time and is what would be considered by most to be pretty attractive. A lot of Black women can't relate to that. So that explains it.
Well, and then that makes so much sense. That actually makes so much sense, because even when I think about going back to marketing, that's like one of the number one things that they talk about, is wanting to make sure that you are connected with your audience. And what that shows me, however, is if the people leading the conversation have such horrible life results, and that's relatable, to so many women, then what is that saying about the caliber of women that's being raised? I mean, that brings up a whole nother question.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, for a lot of black women, no, these are very sensitive issues. These are very, I mean, because let's be honest. I mean, for many women in general, and this would definitely be true for black women, who doesn't want a lasting, if you want to look at it through a romantic lens, who doesn't want a lasting love? Who doesn't want, in many black women, the idea of being an equal partner is very important. Who
Yeah,
wouldn't want somebody like that? Of
right.
course we would. But, for many black women, that's just not a reality. And so listening to black women who, by all accounts, have a charmed life, do you really? There's a reason why you can't think of anybody who fits that mold who has a huge following among black women. There's a reason for
Fair.
that.
No, no, you're absolutely right. Um, and I was thinking about this because I recently started a panel, or I joined a panel with Real from Sapien. I'm sure you've heard of her. She's the one that went viral a few months ago.
Yeah,
About.
she strikes me. Well, she's definitely not black, but she strikes me as
No,
a maybe white and Asian.
no, she's Puerto Rican, or she calls it
Puerto
New
Rican.
Rican.
Okay, gotcha.
New Rican. She said that is a specific kind.
Okay,
But she went, yeah, so she went viral, and ever since then she's been kind of on a feminine journey, and I've had a chance to join her, and I join her like every couple of weeks on like a wife life panel that a few of us are doing, and then I have like my How to Be a Wife series, and what I'm noticing, and granted, I think her audience is primarily white, Hispanic, but what I'm noticing is that there's a market for that. And you have women, going and asking, interested in that. But unfortunately, to your point, we're not seeing that same desire necessarily. I don't see it in the black female spaces. Now, I haven't done I haven't done like a huge deep dive. So I don't want to say that this is, the gospel truth. But I mean, when you have a major female content creators now talking about why marriage doesn't benefit women, and then I go in some of these other spaces with non-black women, and they're creating wife life panels and bringing on other YouTubers and having these conversations. Again, it speaks to me with this huge disconnect, and it's quite sad.
Yeah. I know one of the things I really respect about you is your kind of cautious approach to these things. But let me just kind of throw caution to the wind here for a moment, because you've been around long enough. You're still a relative newcomer, but you've been around for over a year. And I think any reasonable person would say, okay, you've been observing something for a year. That's a reasonable amount of time to get some sense of how things are. Just your gut reaction. What would you say insofar as black love terms on the black female side? What do you think are the main topics? And I'll tell you what I think, but I want to know what you think. What do you think are the main topics or main areas of concern for black women? And we live in a social media world, and there is a intersection between the books and Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. So what is your exactly what do you think are some of the main themes or areas of interest that black women have in the black love space? I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really, really good question. Um, as far as the black female YouTube space, I think the main issues that I hear are essentially, I feel like what we've been hearing for the last couple of decades. These black men don't like black women. So basically, just policing men's dating choices, to cheating, to black men are dusties and don't make enough money. So I kind of feel like the conversation tends to shift between any of those topics.
Right.
Usually it is linked with something that happens with the celebrities, or something that happens with some socialite or somebody that has a following, and it's just using as a way to kind of push the narrative. Now, do I hear anything? Do I hear like really real constructive conversations happening? Rarely. I mean, in certain places, in more of the pick me spaces. But like I said, that doesn't come without intense, intense ridicule from other women, if that
That
makes sense.
there's that, but also the fact that, let's be fair, they aren't, in terms of just sheer size, they are not the major players. They're not the major voices on Black social media on the Black female side. They're they're
Right.
they're they're kind of you know they're on the periphery more or less. They're smaller. They're much smaller channels, or smaller, like Instagram, Facebook, so forth. They have a much smaller footprint. Is my point. And
Yes.
yeah, so I think I think that too is kind of indicative of where we are. So you said a number of things. So one of the things I covered in the book, one of the main concerns of Black women, because I took a different approach to writing the book we're talking about tonight, the Red Book. And I called it "Oops, Baby" because I didn't plan for that. I kind of see my books as my children, and they're my creations. And I planned for my first baby, the Book of Obsidian, the Black Book. I did a lot of planning, a lot of research, um, everything down to the last detail I had planned. So that was my first baby, and I planned for him. But my daughter, so to speak, the Book of Obsidian, the ladies edition, that was an oops baby. It was not planned.
Got it.
And how it came about was, so the Book of Obsidian that come out, the first one, the Black Book, and of course is about, although it's aimed at Black men, obviously we're talking about Black women. Number of Black women wanted to, know what it was all about, and I was, kind of doing the to the extent that I could, and this was in the high days of the pandemic. To the extent that I could, I was kind of making the circuit, so to speak, talking about the book. And a number of ladies would come through and say, "Well, when are you going to write a book for us?" And I thought it was kind of
Mhm.
like a joke, I mean, I was, just pulling your leg.
Right.
So I didn't pay attention to it. And I noticed that I would keep getting those questions. And then I would get people emailing me. And then I'll have people hit me up on Facebook. Either, people showing up in my chat room when I'm doing my live back home and so on. So I didn't take any like a census and do a head count of how many Black women asked me, but just the overall consensus of it was, sisters are really serious out here wanting me to write a book aimed to warn them. And I'm somebody that tries to keep an open mind and tries to be open to new experiences. And I like new challenges and new things. So I started thinking about it. Like, could you really write a book aimed at Black women? And then I started thinking, well, why not? Why not you? Why shouldn't you do it? So I
Yeah.
set out to do research. So um boots on the ground. Um so in the fall of last year, in October, me and Miss Brown Sugar attended a Ace Metaphor event. It was called Tonight's Conversation, and we attended the event. It was jam packed. It was, I would say, better part of 700 people in attendance, and and a mixed crowd. To Ace's, credit, a mixed crowd. It was not just all Black women. It wasn't just a big estrogen fest. It was a lot of Black men there. I would say I would say 60-40 Black women to Black men, which is pretty high. To be brutally frank, I've been to another event he was involved in where you could count the number of Black men in attendance that weren't part of the staff on one hand. So, lot considerable number of Black men. And because I had VIP seating right up I mean, I'm literally on the front row. So we had a chance to have a sit down with Ace before everything got started. Me and her and some other, early bird people. And straight away, he led a conversation about cheating. Now, to be fair, when Black women say cheating, what they mean is Black men cheating. That's what they mean.
Oh, yeah. So of course they're not talking about
Right.
themselves.
Yeah. That's what they mean. Okay. So um I listened to what he had to say. I listened to what some other ladies that were there among the VIPs had to say, and they had to say quite a bit about it. And the research is pretty powerful on this. Black men cheat more than anybody else. I'll cite my source. This comes from the Institute of Family Studies. I think the name of the article is called "Who Cheats More: The Demographics of Cheating or Infidelity in America." Words to that effect. You can find it easily by Google. And of course, it's not perfect because again, many Black people are very wary of data-driven stuff. So they'll talk about sample size and they'll talk about methodology and I get it, but just the point is that going by the data, Black men do cheat more than everybody else.
And presumably this is Black men who you're saying who are in committed relationships, marriages, which I mean arguably is a minority. So this is Black men who are in relationships.
Black men who are married. Black men who are married.
Black men who So this is comparing married Black men with other races of married men.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And the actual number is like I think I want to say it's like 27% or something like that.
Yeah, I remember you say it's around there, high 20%.
Yeah. Okay. So right off the rip, I knew I had to address that in the book. And at the time I was writing the book. So that's the reason why, and I know you've read it because I know you do a lot of research. I'm a sucker for women who do research. You remind me a lot of Ms. Brown Sugar in that regard. And right off the rip, that's the reason why the book itself presents right after the opening chapter about the formula. I call it the formula of the Black love machine. The next chapter is about Black male infidelity. And that was based on my study, and I just gave you one anecdote of boots on the ground experience. And that whole evening, that was a powerful theme. That entire evening that night with Ace Metaphor, a lot of Black women are deeply concerned about Black male infidelity. So that's okay. So that's something that has to be addressed head on. And that's the reason why I did so early on in the book. But then after that, I said, okay. The data also tells us that quite a few Black women cheat too. As a matter of fact, and this is a little known fact, Black women cheat more than other groups of American women. So, to be brutally frank, Black men and Black women have the honor, the dubious honor of being the biggest cheaters in America. And so we have a very much a cheating culture in Black American life. And so the next chapter I wrote dealt with that. And it may very well be the first book of its kind that specifically goes into detail with Black female infidelity and the reasons why. As a matter of fact, there are 4 chief reasons why Black women cheat. And by the way, and I found out this information via a study that was conducted by Black women. By the way, this is not something I made up. This and I listed out in the book. But the 4 main reasons why is in order: sexual pleasure, number 1. Number 2, partner infidelity. Number 3, sexual exchange. In other words, you get flued out in return, you bust it wide open. And number 4, because you had something. Well, the technical term is past main partners. Put it another way, you just got to get that old thing back. So, yeah, cheating overall in the United States among women has skyrocketed in the past 3 decades. So we're tacking this back to the 90s. And researchers say that is due in large part to rising levels of women getting college and post-college educations and commensurate careers. In Black American life, this is a powerful theme for a lot of Black women. And it makes sense. More and more Black women have their own stuff and are less inclined to kind of, do what their moms and grandmoms did in terms of, kind of grinning and bearing it. So it would make sense that you would have rising levels of cheating among women. And I wrote that in the book to say, yes, it's true that men do cheat, no doubt, and I don't condone it. But you ladies need to take a good, long, hard look at yourselves as well.
Right.
Quite a few of you are cheating.
Right.
And quite a few of you are cheating for one or more of those 4 reasons.
I mean, literally everything that women complain about normally in the Black social media, Black love sector, everything they complain about are things that they themselves do or struggle with. And that's the great, I think, irony of this whole thing. Like every single thing from, Dusty's being broke to issues with cheating to the snow bunny crisis. These are all things that Black women themselves have.
Yeah.
So that's something to me that I think is it's just like the hypocrisy is just on another level. But real quick,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now I think what I'm gonna do when I talk, because I do get a bit of an echo. I think when I talk, I'm gonna just mute your or if you wouldn't mind when you're not talking, mute the thing, because I get a little bit of a feedback when I talk, and I think it's because both of our thing is on. So
right,
yeah, okay, but yeah. So that's, like I said, that chapter to me I thought was brilliant, because like what it's basically doing is it's starting to shine a light on basically all of the different areas where we just have not, as women, been honest with ourselves and what that actually means. And another thing that I really thought when I was looking through, the different chapters, the Black Plain Jane, which I thought was really, really interesting breakdown, the way that you described it and just the different reasons that you gave as to why a quote unquote Black Plain Jane had maybe more options a couple of decades ago, and now she can be in this really tough place. But
let me just stop right there, if I can stop you right there, because that's a very good point. In the Black Manosphere, and so again, if you take my 2 books and put them together, they kind of link up here. So there's been a lot of conversation, and I've definitely been at the epicenter of it, of this great Pookie and Ray Ray debate, right?
Right.
So
you definitely have.
So the long suffering educated lame, if you will, right? Really kind of up against it in a 21st century mating market, right, in Black America, right? Because the things that would have made him a pretty decent mate in the past, he works hard and he loves the kids. For whatever the reason, is not seen as appealing as much anymore by so many Black women, right? So, and the argument is that these guys have got to learn how to sex it up and get some swag and so on and so forth, right? But then I would listen to Black women saying that hoes be winning. And at the time, Brittany Renner was like really pervasive in the on the social media streets. She was kind of seen as the poster child of this vixen that was, kind of breaking men's hearts and that sort of thing. And Instagram, we live in an Instagram world, and a lot of ladies have availed themselves of an Instagram life, and they all have a very similar look and affect that has a powerful allure for many Black men. And so I would hear a lot of Black women. I went to a Stephane Labossiere event. This was also in October of last. Well, this would have been in October of 2019. And that's exactly what the ladies were saying in the audience. They were asking him, what does he think about this idea that hoes be winning? And he kind of, gave his kind of word salad response, to tell you the truth. But I sat there and thought about it, and I wasn't thinking about the educated lame thing at the time, but now that I'm looking back on it, it really is a kind of mirror or 2 sides of the same coin type of experience, because what a lot of plain Jane Black women have to accept, and it is a bit different for women than it is for men, Black women and Black men, is that the women that are really good with getting attention from guys, at least in some ways, are winning out. And the number one way of getting attention from guys at the moment is through social media. And like I said, Instagram. So, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. I just don't. And, a lot of guys really resonate to that for reasons that I can explain. But the bottom line is that if you're a black woman, and by the way, and this is the other thing too. So then we had the average at best incident happen. So my position on it was, if you're a smart sister and you got some nickels to rub together, you would be very wise in investing that directly into your physical appearance. Bottom line, that's the most straight route to moving the needle on the guy front. I mean, you can do other stuff, but they're not as impactful as straight ahead improving your appearance. But bottom line, for guys is a little bit different, but not by much, because one of the things that I learned in doing my research for the first book, and then it re-emphasized again in the second book. I have a chapter in there called the Select F-Boy Paradox. I don't know what you thought about that, but it re-emphasized black women are extremely visual. That's the one thing I've learned over the past 3 years.
That's true. You ain't lying about that.
They're extremely visual.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more than women of other races, by the way. A lot more. About like an order of magnitude more. It's not to say that women of other races don't like a good looking guy. They do.
Right.
But it's black women put so much place of importance on that nothing else can happen if that threshold isn't met. Nothing else happens.
Right.
So for other women of other races, he may be average looking or below average looking, but he's got other things going on. He's still got a shot. For black women, if you don't pass that threshold, nothing else happens. And I was saying to the brothers in the Black Manosphere, I do understand where they're coming from with that, but it really is a losing battle. I mean, if you want to consider, putting up a valiant fight, that's one thing, but it really is a losing battle. The simple thing, the only thing you can do is try to max what some people in certain other circles would say looks maxing. You try to max out your looks and try to go from there. Because for black women, for whatever reason, for them, how our brother looks is very important. And so what I was trying to say is the same, very similar on the black female side for these black plain types. That looks is very important for men, and you only need to go to Instagram to bear that out. So,
well, a couple of things, and before I get into it, I do want to acknowledge Better You with the 5 on the CASHAPP. I mean, super chat. Sorry about that. It says, hello to you both. Do you think another reason for cheating is to damage, emotionally manipulate partners? I do. There are definitely people I think out there who are just so dang petty that they'll do something wrong just to get somebody back. I definitely think. Now, I don't know the percentage on that. I don't know, Mr. Student, if you have anything, but I do think there's a percentage of people who cheat just to be petty, which I think you kind of allude to in the book.
Absolutely. That's number 2 on the list, is partner infidelity. A lot of black women will cheat because their partner cheated and they're getting back at them.
Right.
That's number 2 on the list. That's right behind sexual pleasure.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, I got that order directly from the studies. That I didn't arrange the order of that. I got it directly from the studies.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and see what chapter, because I remember you breaking down. It was something like 4 or 5, I think, different reasons why black women cheat. It was pretty.
That's chapter 3. Chapter 3 on black women cheating. Chapter 3.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Right after black men. Okay. And then shout out to Hakeem for the 10 on the super chat. I appreciate you as always. You will show support and love. Now back to some of your earlier points about, I'm not even gonna lie, when you talked about black women leading or selecting their partners based upon looks. You're right. I mean, I don't have any pushback there, because I'm like that. I mean, just everybody. Any black woman out there knows that that's just the case. Even if you're with a good guy who has a good education and he is articulate and he's kind, if he doesn't look the part, you're gonna get shamed. So I feel like it's his unspoken rule, to be quite honest. So that's why I read through that explanation and I'm like, I'm laughing because this is so true. It's so true, and there's evidence behind it.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot of evidence, both anecdotal and empirical, that bears that out. And my
right.
tracking it back to the guys first, I guess there really is something to be said for you kind of ice skating uphill with this, because
Mm-hmm.
black women can be extraordinarily stubborn, and but I think the other part of it, and this is where we got to give a lot of credit to Kevin, is that he was able to present a way that you can kind of look smacks in a
Mm-hmm.
way that can actually work for you. Every brother cannot fit into the mold of a urban brother. Okay. That's not
Right.
something that works for every black man. I think that
Right.
works for some black men, but I don't think it works for every black man. And I think the thing that I really appreciated about Kevin is that he was able to present another spin on black masculinity that's a possibility. I'm not saying every brother has to, because I think some black men kind of railed against the idea that every black man has to be suited and booted. That's not what he said. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's another option. The urban affect doesn't work for me. That's just not where my heart is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no doubt from an urban area, but that affect is not something that works for me. It never really did. Um, the physical representation that you see today is much more who I am on the inside. So what I'm saying to a lot of
Right.
brothers in terms of the whole looks and appearance thing is y- uh there are other options other than the urban affect that you can try out. And I'm a personal witness that I have yet to have a lady complain about it. Haven't had any complaints.
Right. Well, yeah, yeah, makes sense. I mean, going back to the importance of appearance, we had this conversation, I think a few months back when he kind of popped into the panel, and we kind of landed on partially why Kevin Samuels was so popular was because of his image. And if he hadn't come correct, then people wouldn't be listening to him. Quite frankly, I think that is why there's a lot of women who have some negative to say about the manosphere as a whole. Um, and I know this has kind of been some of the beef, right? Where it's like you have some who try to present very, very, very well, and then you also have some who don't. Like they look like they're streaming from a bathroom or something,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
image that turns off a lot of women.
yeah. I learned a lot from Kevin, and still learning,
Hmm.
even though he's been gone for some months now. But I'm
Hmm.
but still learning from him. And those little things do count, and they do matter. But the good news, like I said to a lot of brothers, is that you're not locked into, because a lot of black men feel a lot of pressure to, and to be fair, this could be said on the other side with the ladies, to be fair, since we are talking about them tonight. A lot of brothers feel a lot of pressure to be in a street mold. Okay. And the thing that I'm very appreciative about what Kevin did for us is he showed us
Uh-huh.
that you don't have to be locked into that.
Right.
And your show was so impactful because so many ladies affirmed that. So that's the good news for the brothers,
Right.
is that you don't have to be locked into a street mode of representation. You
Well,
can branch out
mhm.
beyond that. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's arguably past 30, right? Women prefer that. They prefer the polished look. They prefer the man that has it all together. Now, when they're young, they want the tattoos. They don't want that. And
Yeah.
I mean that goes into another conversation of why so many women end up passing by really really good men, because the men who would be successful and the men who would have a solid stable career and a name for themselves and be able to provide are just flat out not considered sexy when they're building or when they're early on in their career. I mean, I can see this
Yeah.
anecdotally for different young men I know who are in college getting degrees right now at incredible universities, killing it. And I've had conversations with the different expectations women have for them when they're in college and having to present a certain way and having to look a certain way. And it's like, nobody in college has any money. Everybody's broke. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just bananas.
Yeah. This is something else I wanted to write in. I wanted to put in the first book, and I didn't have time. The idea of building a boo, a lot of struggle love. That's a
Right.
very powerful theme for many Black women online. Even when I've gone to live events, like I said, Ace Metaphor, Stefan Labase, and so forth, a lot of Black women really don't like that, and it's a very, from a Black male side of it, it's very and me and Miss Brown Sugar talked about this on a podcast recently, with the whole Jay Ellis issue. Um, a lot of Black men have a lot of hard feelings about that because you kind of going through your ramen noodle and sleeping in the sleeping bag phase,
Yeah,
and and if you do manage, because there is no guarantee that you're going to make it as a man. I mean, and this is something else that a lot of brothers
that's true.
will have to accept, is that the male of the animal species is nature's laboratory, um because of the way females are designed. Mother Nature can't afford to experiment on her the way that they can afford to experiment on us. So that's one reason why they're less likely to take risks and take chances, um because it pays, if you're a woman, to play it safe in the broad sweep of evolutionary terms. Whereas betting it all on Black, so to speak, makes sense if you're a guy, because there is the possibility of losing big, but there's also the possibility of winning big, and to the winners go the spoils. So yeah, guys building themselves, it's a multi-decade project. um it's often filled with pitfalls and obstacles, and
Yep.
challenges and setbacks.
Yep.
um you're going to have your wins and losses, and when you finally arrive, that's, yeah, as Kevin put it himself, a lot of ladies just want to kind of line up at the finish line. And while it's understandable, it has a lot of hard feelings for a lot of brothers. I think that's what kind of animates the whole passport brother thing and all the rest of it.
Well, the interesting thing about that is Becky, for all intents and purposes, is more likely or willing to build a boo. That is to say, at the very least, in my anecdotal experience, I can say this anecdotally. I know countless and countless of my friends personally who have gotten with their husbands in college, out of college. Some of them gone, living with parents for some time to try to save up. Um, you know, the wife may be working as she puts her husband goes to school or starts a new business, like really working together, by all intents and purposes, building a booth. I see women doing this all the time. And even I have other older women that I know who've been married for 40, 50 years. They talk to me about the different things that they had to go through. Lean seasons where they had to budget,
Yeah.
different seasons where maybe her husband lost their job and they had to find different ways. Like
Yeah.
in real life, even this whole housewife, stay-at-home housewife mentality, they were also building a booth for all intents and purposes, and being alongside their man as he
Yeah.
navigated through different seasons. So
Yeah.
it's like this whole idea is literally a fantasy. It's like, unless you are born into a trust fund, which most Black people, that is not their experience.
And
You're
the vast
talking about
majority of
white
white
people.
people, the vast
Yeah,
majority of white people will not be born in that. Let me.
right.
I just got some dinner, and they're waiting downstairs. I'm gonna run downstairs and grab it and come right back.
Yeah, that's fine. No worries. Um, We're going to be transitioning into another topic moving forward, but right now we're just going over the Book of Obsidian, the ladies edition, and some of the different points that were made that I think are very, very much relevant to what's going on today in the Black love, dating, and mating market. So this has been a fun conversation. You know, one thing I will say as he's, I think, grabbing his dinner, and maybe those of you guys in my comments can let me know your thoughts, but an idea that stood out to me in his book, and just something I've noticed really in general ever since really being deep on these social media streets, is this whole topic of weight. And why is it so offensive? What about talking about weight is so offensive, not only to women, but to Black women in particular? Like, for example, I was an overweight kid, right? So I was aware of weight problems early on. And it got to a point where I looked at myself in the mirror and I just didn't like the way I looked. And I just was like, okay, I just have to go on a diet. Like, there was really no other way around it. I had my first diet in like 6th grade, grapefruit diet. I remember I ate like chicken. It was like a protein heavy diet. It was like chicken, vegetables, and then a side of grapefruit. Like, I did that for months. Then I went into Atkins, then I went into South Beach diet, then I went into Weight Watchers, all these different diets. And trust me, I'm not one for diet culture because I can create its own issue. But nevertheless, you know, it came to a point where I looked at myself in the mirror. I just wasn't happy with how I looked, or quite frankly, how I felt. And I wanted to lose weight. So I did it. And we understand no matter how much marketing and things are out there to talk about body positivity, I understand their attempt, but at the end of the day, a lot of Black women are just unhealthy. Like, they're unhealthy, and a lot of the issues plaguing as far as chronic illnesses, diseases, it's from being overweight, and a lot of the issues that are going on in relationships, and not necessarily maybe getting the kind of men that women complain or say that they want, can also be attributed to weight. And so I don't understand why something that is so practical, or something that could be so beneficial to Black women's health, if it's addressed, why it's so offensive to talk about it, especially when so many are impacted. Why? I don't understand. And that's something that came up to me a lot. He has a whole chapter dedicated to plus size women. And even in that chapter, there are rules which I thought were quite interesting. But it brought me to this idea of why is weight such an off-topic subject? Anytime somebody brings it up, it's offensive. Like, it's like the elephant in the room. Like, nobody can talk about it unless you're being disrespectful. And I just don't understand why.
Yeah, good point. I guess we can jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but this is, I mean, it's just something, because obviously it's so important. I don't know if you have any thoughts on. Ooh, oh, sorry, I had a little feedback there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously it's so important because it affects so many Black. I mean, the majority of Black women are obese. Like, not just like, oh, a little pudgy here, a little, a little baby weight, a little. It's like, no, obese, right. Obese, like not healthy. Like, oh, a little pudgy here. So, like, I don't understand why this is such a thing when it's actually something that women experience every single day. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But.
Yeah. So I do touch on this in the book as well. As a matter of fact, right, we're talking about the plight of the Black plain Jane. Right before that chapter, I have a chapter called "Rules for Big Girls."
What I thought was quite interesting. Although I thought was quite interesting, yeah.
Well, what did you find interesting about it?
Well, okay. What I find interesting is that okay, the body positive movement, as I understand it right now, basically what it's saying is that remove all standards. Remove all standards for women. It doesn't matter how small or how big. It doesn't matter how you look at any capacity. Just show up and be yourself. Which, again, I would be more accepting of that if the generosity was also given to men. It's not. But nevertheless, it's remove all standards for women. And what I see in theory is, quite frankly, women being put in positions where they are, quite frankly, unhealthy. Like, it's not just like, oh, you're naturally big boned, or maybe you have, skin issues, or you have certain things about your body that's genetic you can't change. These are women who are at a point in their life where they're at risk, and that's being celebrated. And there is no emphasis really on, okay, even if I am going to be a plus size, you still maybe want to try to have this aesthetic. You still maybe want to try to stay within, I don't know, maybe this range or maybe this BMI. You still want to have this kind of shape. It's none of that. It's just show up and come as you are. And there are no standards. Now, with your book, however, you put that even as a plus size woman, there are standards. There is, the shape. You still want to be healthy. You still probably want to exercise. You want to have this, you want to be big in the right places. So you're basically saying, okay, even big women need to have standards. The body positive movement does not. And it says kind of remove all standards and accept whatever the woman comes with. And so that's what I thought to be quite interesting.
Because I knew I had to take it on precisely for the reasons that you mentioned. So I said, okay, let me see if I can try to take a step back and do an objective sweep of this. So there is known in the fashion modeling world. One of my sisters was a fashion model, and she had did international shoots and stuff. She did, she was in places like Cancun and stuff like that. And but she's very petite. She's like 5 foot in a size 4. Well, and when she was modeling, she was like a size 0. And now she has twin daughters, my nieces, who are on that same modeling track. So so I know a little bit about that world. In there's what's known as the plus size modeling world. And you have some pretty big names, and I mentioned a few of them in this chapter. Letitia Thomas, who was a squeeze of Lil Wayne, and then he went from her to another plus size model named Miss Denise Bedeau. She's originally Cuban background. Now there are certain parameters for plus size models, right? Number one, you have to be tall, right? So we're looking at bare minimum around 5'8".
Yeah.
Somewhere, and runway models tend to be 6 foot plus, but fashion models, people that show up in Fashion Over and that sort of thing, and these people have shown up there. The two names I mentioned, Letitia Thomas and Denise Bedeau, and other outlets, they both range in the 5'10", 5'11" range. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so if you want to do the plus size thing, that would be one consideration, height. Number two, you have to look at their body shapes. They may be larger ladies, but they still have a Coke bottle shape. Okay, so we're talking about weight, to be technical, waist to hip ratio, as black folks would say. You still have a slim waist there. So there's that. And of course, these are above average looking facially women. So another big name, and I don't know if I mentioned her in the chapter or not, but another big name who happens to be black is Tabria Major. She's she's like 5'10", 5'11", very, very attractive facially and so forth. She's probably, if not definitely one of the bigger names, pardon the pun, on the plus model side.
Right.
So my point in that chapter was to say, okay, look, if the argument is, we should be more accepting and so forth, every woman can't be a size 4. Okay, that's fair. Would meeting the standard of these ladies be fair? These are all plus size ladies. These are all plus size ladies who make their daily living by being plus size. Would it be fair to use them as a kind of template? Would that be fair? And I'm waiting to hear what the ladies have to say about that one. Would that be fair?
You're saying would it be fair to use a template that plus size models have to?
Yeah.
Have to.
Right.
No, because that goes against removing all standards. You have to remove all standards for it to be body positive. To have standards no longer makes it positive. So that's a no.
Yeah. and that's the problem. So
no.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because we recently had a conversation about a video you did about Lizzo. And I have written about Lizzo quite a bit in my first book, but that was aimed at the guys. And I don't know if I really touch on her or not. I'll search through it as we're speaking. But Lizzo has become, you know, essentially the face of the body positivity movement these days.
Right.
Okay. Um, rightly or wrongly. And she is a um spokeswoman of sorts for that movement. She is something of an activist in that regard. And I would say she would not fit the um Letitia Thomas, Denise Bidot, Tabria Major standard. I would say she wouldn't.
Right.
She's like 100 pounds over.
No, I hear you. There are limitations even within that, for sure.
So yeah. If for the ladies that want to make the case that because really this is really a reaction to Kevin. And he put out his own kind of schema on this, and a lot of sisters kind of railed against it, seeing it as white. I said, okay, fine. And that's the reason why I used Letitia Thomas and Denise Bidot, because they were not black; they were, non-black women. So you can't use the argument that it's European beauty standards, small, skinny. They're not small, skinny. So I'm just simply asking the ladies, okay, fine. If that's how you're going to play it, then would it be fair to follow? And I used Tabria Major. Would it be fair to follow these people? And I'm very curious as to see what the ladies will say. Now, you may very well be right. They may say, well, no, that's not fair either. And that goes to your point about we just want to remove all standards for us while holding the highest of standards for men, which is what I loved about your video on Lizzo. And there was a number of people in your chat room trying to argue that it's just a music video. I respectfully disagree. Black women get their cues from social media. Black
Of
women get
course.
their cues, their cultural cues. What's good? What's bad? What you should be for? What you should not be for? What you should aspire to be? What you should aspire to have? What you should not have? What you should not tolerate? They take their marching orders from videos, music videos, social media, TV shows, etc. And the people who make those things possible. So like a rapper or a singer or entertainer or an actor, actress, they take their cues from this. So Lizzo in a bridal gown, hugged up with Tyson Beckford, that is sending a message to a lot of black women.
Of course it is. That's the whole reason I did that video. And that to me, as I mentioned before, is the main issue with body positivity. Listen, I have different people I know personally who have conditions and things that affect their metabolism and psychologically how that weighs on them. So it's like I generally tend to be in support of having more accepting standards for women, also for men, if we want to have that conversation, if we want to do it. But I'm like, the only way it can be done is if we're going to have a loosened standards for men. And unless that happens, then it's all cap. And men aren't going, you can't, it's like there is no affirmative action in dating and mating. And that's another thing that really came up to me in this book, and that one chapter where you kind of talked about essentially beauty standards and the colorism topic.
Yeah.
And the different initiatives that have been seen essentially to kind of have this whole affirmative action approach when it comes to women being chosen. And it's like, it doesn't work like that when it comes to dating and mating. Like,
which is the reason why, as a self-professed, and the appropriate term I have discovered these days to use is short king. So as a short king, this is the reason why I'm not a fan of the idea of brothers, shorter men banding together and kind of putting together a movement, precisely for what you said. For many Black Americans, and I talked about this in the first book, and then I bring it forward in the second. I understand the idea of being discriminated against. I get the idea of being left out and excluded. The problem is we being Black people are attempting to solve every problem with a hammer.
Right.
Because we see every problem as a nail. and we have to have more tools in the toolbox. Racial discrimination was something that we needed to hammer, as known as the federal government, to sort out. We needed that. It was hammers by their very nature are imperfect, because you can do just as much damage with a hammer as you can doing something constructive and building. So there's that. But when it comes to this issue that we're talking about, which is human mating in the scene in the context of a 21st century Black American mating market, Black love, if you will. You can't legislate that. You can't, do a march on Washington with that. You can't do a sit-in or a boycott on that. You can't march on that. You just can't. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Exactly.
And a lot of black women are deeply misguided in thinking that they can apply a civil rights approach to this.
Right.
If you really sit down and think about it, that's really what it amounts to.
Yeah.
If you really sit down and think about it, the colorism movement is essentially saying that Black men are being racist and discriminatory toward us being darker skinned Black women. It is a racial argument. It is a racism argument.
Yeah,
absolutely. And even if you accept the premise, you can't solve it. We supposed to pass legislation by law? Are we supposed to have sit-ins? Are we supposed to have a march on Washington for this?
Yeah.
And if so, where does it stop? Because like you just got finished saying, now this is your point. That's really good. Okay, so we do that. Where does it stop? Because the next question has to be, okay, we do that. Why can't we do it for the same thing for the guys? How many Black women would be okay with being essentially marched on because they don't date short guys, or they don't date blue collar guys, or they don't want to struggle up? I mean, stuff like that. Would they be okay with that?
It's not happening.
And if so, right. And then they would have to explain why their situation does necessitate such action and the other side does not. Because now you're getting into now we're getting into a question of just being flat out un-American. You can't specifically target certain Americans to do one thing and then exclude other Americans from that same thing. That was the whole point of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. That was the basis of striking down prohibitions against gay people getting married. You can't do stuff like that. So that's the reason why I made that point first in the first book for the brothers. And it must be emphasized. I was saying this to Black men. Life is unfair, man. As a matter of fact, there's a saying from Thomas Sowell, who I know you're familiar with. He says words to the effect of, tests are unfair because life is unfair and tests only measure the results. And what I'm saying to the brothers in the first book, and then we can bring it to the book that we're talking about now, the red book for the ladies. I say to the brothers off rip, life is unfair, man. And you're not going to be able to, legislate your way into the arms of the lady of your choice. It just doesn't work that way. And you're going to have to be able to make your peace with that. You're not going to be the cat's meow for every woman out there. You're not going to be the cat's meow for the women that you want. This is something that a lot of brothers are going to have to be. I can't tell them what to do. What I'm saying is they're going to have to confront is that maybe the ladies that really like you, you're not particularly crazy about. And then you're going to have to ask yourself, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, and that, let's just keep it real. Those kinds of conversations don't really exist among women. They don't. And it's funny. If I think of this entire, just the entirety of this book, from the F boy to the Black plain Jane to the rules to the big girls, to the all these different topics, all these different subjects, and really what it boils down to is, what are you willing to do to get the results that you want? And this isn't a conversation I think that's readily had are usually had among Black women, and if it is had, it's not done without extreme offense. So, and what was so, I think what was telling, I don't want to say somewhat pessimistic, but I'm trying to think of the right word, maybe dystopian, right? Was the
Yeah.
end of your chapter where you're talking about the different stages of grief. And to be brutally honest, I've had this conversation with my husband in general, where the very fact that we're having some of these kinds of conversations, the very fact that that you felt a necessity to write a book to unmarried women over 30s who are having hard times in relationships, like the fact that there is a market for that speaks to a culture, speak to a community that is declining at best. Like that is, it's not, these are not the markings of a thriving community. When people aren't getting married, babies are being had out of wedlock, more and more women or men are having hard times finding love, divorce rate, like these are not the signs of a improving, thriving community. So your last chapter where you talk about the different stages of grief,
Yeah.
as dystopian as it was, I had to think about it and be like, if things don't change, if there isn't a dramatic change on all these different levels, then the writing's on the wall. And that's kind of the sad thing about it, to be honest.
Yeah. I so the last chapter. So what I did with the book was I took a different approach to writing the red book for than I did for the first book. So the first, because I've worked with Black men for so long, it was a lot easier. And the second book was a bit much more challenging because I had not worked with Black women before. So I had to kind of start from scratch. The first book was easier, and I was able to make use of O'Shea Duke Jackson's website, the Negro Manosphere. And so what I did was I kind of took a cue from people like Charles Dickens, who, you know, his, Great Expectations, for example, started out as in serialized form in magazines, periodicals. And so each chapter would kind of appear, and then he put it all together. So that's what I did. So a lot of the chapters, the majority of the chapters, not all of them, but the majority of the chapters of the Book of Obsidian, the Black Book, the one for the brothers, started out as columns for the Negro Manosphere, and that was on purpose. It was not
Yeah.
a happenstance. I did that deliberately. But for this book, for the ladies' edition, the red book, the Oops Baby, I had to start from scratch. So I wrote all of the chapters in house. In other words, nobody had a chance to see them before they were all published as a volume.
Yeah.
And that meant that I had to do a lot more homework and research. And so I spent a lot, and this is still during, the high days of the pandemic. So I spent a lot of time online, excuse me, going to venues online where I knew a lot of Black women would be, and they would be expressing themselves. And I just was like a fly on the wall and just kind of listened. Yeah, I tell you one thing, a quick sidebar. I tell you one thing I learned from writing that book. It helped me be a very good listener.
Mm-hmm.
Really helped me listen a lot to Black women. It helped me be a really good listener. And that's how I pretty much wrote the book, because I was responding to things that I heard Black women say online. Facebook, Instagram, to some extent YouTube. I wasn't really into TikTok like that, but those were the big three for me: Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, in that order. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
I would listen to what Black women were saying and jotting down, going back to the whole thing about all the notes all over the place, kind of jotting down what they were saying that was important to them. And I kind of put it all together, and I would address it. And I would write a chapter on, I would pick a topic and write a chapter on it and look up the data and stuff like that. So, the idea, where are all the good men at? Where have all the good men gone? That was the whole basis of the chapter: location, location, location. The question about, the overweight thing and all that, that that sparked the chapter about rules for big girls, and so on. So that's how it all kind of happened. And It was a very interesting experience. You know, you hear, or at least I do. I would watch stuff like C-SPAN. Like C-SPAN would have these shows where basically this is what we're doing right now, kind of in depth. You know, you get an author and you kind of get them to talk about their writing process and the book and stuff like that. And I always was a big fan of that type of format. And I would notice that all of those authors that would come through on C-SPAN's in depth, you know, with the different authors and stuff, they will all say that they learned so much in writing the book, to the point where I kind of took it as kind of cliche, but I can say now, 2 books in, that I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about Black women writing this book.
Hmm.
I learned a lot.
And would you say that what you learned, did it confirm beliefs that you already had, or were there different things that you kind of walked away considering that you hadn't considered before?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Some things I did, you know, kind of figured out that, yeah, that goes without saying, right? But the other things were kind of surprising, like going back to the Black female cheating piece. I was surprised to find the results that I did. And you know, sexual pleasure matters a lot to Black women. It really does.
No, absolutely. I think I had like one more question right here, and then I know we wanted to talk a little bit about Cynthia G, because this is, believe it or not, it's all related. Since I think she represents in so many ways the who would be considered the target audience of your book.
Yeah.
And now, whether or not they would actually read your book is something different. But
You know, you
the
never
people.
you be surprised. You know, it's funny. Especially now I know you
Mhm.
deleted the guy's comment, since we're now kind of moving into the Cynthia G portion of this. Brother came on and, just paraphrasing him, saying that, you know, her channel was bigger, you're helping her channel to grow and so forth.
Mhm.
And channel size matters and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
For the uninitiated, they say, oh my God, you know, so and so has, you know, X number of subscribers. They got to be yeah, no. What I have learned about this social media thing is, just because you have a smaller channel, or just because you may not have as big a name recognition as some other people, comparatively speaking, do not assume people are not listening. There have been people listening to me I had no idea were listening, just beyond my wildest dreams. You know, I did an interview with a lady from Revolt TV, and she said, "Yeah, I've been listening to you for years." And I said, "What?" You know, it kind of floored me. And she said, "Yeah, my boyfriend turned me on to you, and I've been listening to you for years." Tasha K, when Kevin did a sit down with her, and he said, "You know, there's a brother in the Black Manosphere. He's not as well known. His name is Mumia Obsidian Ali." And Tasha K immediately said, "Yeah, I've heard of him."
Yeah.
So, you know, you never know who's listening, man. Don't ever assume that people aren't listening. You never know
Well,
who's
even, no, absolutely. Well, and here's here's the approach that I try to take, because I think sometimes it can be really easy. I notice this especially among female spaces, and no shade, no shade to anybody personally, but sometimes we can kind of dance around the issue. And when I talk about this different content creators, some of the different content, it's like this is a public platform. People put their information out there for people to hear, for people to be, critique, people to understand, learn. So I have nothing to hide. So if I'm tagging a Cynthia G, or if I'm tagging, whoever it may be, if I've listened to their content and I have something to say, I don't have anything there's something to hide. It's not like okay, let me throw a rock and hide your hand. Like, I'm going to be very direct about it, because like, we're all adults here. And as long as this is a public platform and we should be able to have open, respectful discourse, I see nothing wrong with that. So this whole, oh, well, she has bigger channel and you're making her more popular, or et cetera, et cetera. It's like, that's not even how I look at it. Like, we can all be grown adults and have a conversation. If I'm talking about somebody's content, I don't need to be all, secretive about it and be all funny style. I can say I'm referencing Cynthia G's content, or
yeah.
I'm referencing, I don't know, divestive zealot content, or I'm referencing, because it's like, we're all adults. I don't need to be afraid here. I would have a conversation with any of these lovely ladies if given the opportunity, even though I may completely disagree with some of them like 100%.
Well, it is interesting. Now, we talked about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the chances of that happening, I would say, are almost nil.
I recognize that. I recognize it at this point.
Yeah. And the reason why, because we're having this conversation about Cynthia G. I'm going to assume she's going to hear it. So here's where I'm at with it, and we do have a history. So here's where I'm at with this. I want to be as respectful to all parties as possible, and try to be as objective as possible. Mm-hmm. So I'm not here to denigrate her or tear her down, anything like that. Here's where I'm at with this. Cynthia G is successful for a reason. We talked about this earlier. A lot of Black women relate to Cynthia G. She's never been married. She is educated. She comes from a family where her father was, left a lot to be desired. She's had very negative experiences with Black men. She is, staring down 40. Mm-hmm. Depending on who you believe, she's now a single mom. Depending on who you believe. Even if you left that one off, there are millions of Black women who can relate to Cynthia G.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it makes sense why she's successful. In the currency of social media, which is like, shares, subscribers, followers, and by extension, revenues that can be generated from that, indirectly through AdSense and directly through Super Chat and CASHAPP and so forth. There's a reason why she's successful. There are a lot of Black women that relate to her, and she has a significant constituency. Now, that being said, her solutions are untenable. To the extent that she does offer solutions, they're untenable. There's a suboptimal solution, but the very fact that she's able to exist and to, in many ways thrive is because there are a lot of Black women that can relate to her. There are not many Black women that can relate to you, Chardé. We talked about this privately, but there are not a whole lot of Black women that can relate to you. There'll be more Black women that can relate to Cynthia than can relate to you.
Yeah. That's something I have to, I'm like, when you broke it down that way, I was like, that fair point. And this isn't me. I don't think I'm better than anyone else. I don't look at it that way, but I do understand that it's like, just something as simple as being married these days puts you in a totally different category in an era where women are making money now talking about how unvaluable marriage is, despite the evidence and stats to show otherwise. So it's like,
well, they are right in a sense. They are right in the sense, though, because if you are not so we know that marriage works for the wealthiest, the upper class of Americans. We know it works. We have all kind of data on that. The divorce rate among the upper class is like around 20%. If you compare that to the working class, is like 3 times that. So if you're a Black woman, very few Black women are in the upper class overall. And there was a study that came out in Psychology Today, written by Jessica, I can't remember her last name, Black academic out of Wayne State University. Jessica something, her name escapes me. But in any event, the name of the article was called Strategic Singlehood. And Wayne State University is located in Detroit. Think about Detroit. Detroit was once upon a time the epicenter of Black American life. You had Harlem, you had Atlanta, you had Chicago, but Detroit was different.
Right.
Detroit was the place where you could literally build your life. Okay. This is especially true for Black men, but if you were a Black woman and you were with a Black man that could be, work at Ford plant, Chrysler, Mopar, and so forth, you could literally build your life.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that changed with the riots of the latter 60s, and it never returned. So if you're a black person that's kind of left behind in Detroit today, because there are notable exceptions. I happen to know of one, somewhat personally. But matter of fact, I happen to know of a few of them now that I think about it. But I think they would even agree with me that they are the exception that proves the rule. If you're a black person that's kind of left behind in Detroit, you're a black woman that's been left behind. Okay. Yeah, your options for a mate don't look good. And what they bring to the table is a lot more on the left side of the ledger than on the right side of the ledger. And so, yeah, it would make sense that you do better off going it alone. So when Cynthia G talks about, the pitfalls of marriage for black women, she's not talking about black women like you. I mean, let's just keep it all the way a buck. You went to, if I'm not mistaken, you went to UC Berkeley. Your father teaches at UC Berkeley. For all intents and purposes, UC Berkeley is, it's not an Ivy League school. It's not Stanford, but it's pretty damn close. And most black women just won't be able to relate to that. Most black women come a lot closer to that sister in Detroit, that academic from Wayne State, than they do you. And that includes Cynthia G. And that makes sense why they would take the view that they do. I understand it. I get it.
Now, okay, help me understand a bit, because what you're saying is that for basically, you're saying women in the lower class, within a certain educational background, them going it alone is better than pairing with a man. That's not, I'm trying to make sure I understand your point. Them going it alone, raising a kid by themselves is better than doing it with the support of somebody else.
Yeah, and this got me into trouble with my brothers here in the Black Manosphere. I'm not going to go into the names, but it got me in trouble because there are many brothers who see themselves as being coming from the salt of the earth, good people that, their only sin is that they're blue collar, or that they're, average earning, or what have you. And what got me into trouble with them was me acknowledging the fact that, yes, these brothers can be, average or slightly above average earning and blue collar and so forth. But some of these guys also bring some problems. If you're a man that's not faithful, if you're a man that has an alcohol or drug problem, if you're a black man who still lives, and we're using Detroit for an example, you're still living in 1950s Detroit. Mm-hmm. So, you expect a woman to, it is interesting because the 1950s black man in Detroit, his woman didn't work, or didn't work the way a black woman today works. That is to say, full-time, out of the home, and actively contributing to the maintenance of the home. So if she doesn't pay bills, you don't have lights. If she doesn't pay bills, y'all might be out of house and home, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. The 1950s brother in Detroit was working at the plant and can carry all that on his own. The 21st century brother in Detroit is doing what the 1950s version did, but needs the 21st century sister to contribute, but expects her to act the same way that the 1950 sister acted. That's a dicey proposition at best.
Okay, so I want to make sure. So you're talking about, for essentially the men on their level, as you would put it. The men on their level want the same level of commitment, the same level of submission, but don't bring the same monetary value to the table. And that's why you're saying, for somebody in their position, it is going to be better to do it alone, because at least they're not going to have to deal with the headache of dealing with a man.
Yeah, and this is something that kind of got me into trouble with some brothers in the Black Manosphere, because they see me as kind of like selling them out And what I'm saying is that it's a both and proposition. At being a Blue Henry for 22 years, okay, right out of high school. I mean, I graduated high school in June. July, I started my career. 22 years in the skilled trades. Okay, nonstop. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm not gay, and I never dealt with a man, but just observing a lot of these brothers, there are a lot of brothers who they may show up to work every day and do what they do, but they're not the easiest people to get along with. I can only imagine what it's like living with that guy. There is some truth to that. There is something to be said for that. And I think a lot of brothers don't really consider that to be important. For a lot of brothers, their thing is they putting food on the table and keeping the lights on. And that should be enough. And what's really challenging for a lot of brothers in today's world is that it's not. And a lot of brothers
that women want more.
Right. A lot of brothers are having difficulty with that. And there's no easy answers. But I'm saying all of this to say, and again, I want to be as dignified as possible in dealing with this Cynthia G conversation. Yeah, there's something to be said for that. A lot of brothers will not like it. I've taken a lot of heat for it. But yeah, there's something to be said for that. I can understand why there are some sisters who say that, getting married is more trouble than it's worth. I can dig it. I can dig it.
Very, 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 very interesting. So then you would say, because this brings to the issue, I think now of, I mean, you mentioned the different social issues that can arise. Drug addiction, alcoholism, abuse. I mean, granted, those things do exist in upper middle class environments, but when you have the creature comforts, there's different ways to navigate it. When you're dealing with that, and you're struggling to pay bills, it's a whole extra added layer of stress. But now for your average Black woman who, makes, I think it's around 36K.
Yeah.
I mean, I think your average woman in general makes 36K. It's a little lower for Black women.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe if it's better for her to go alone emotionally, maybe because she doesn't have to deal with a man, but she still has a kid to deal with. How does that work? Because a lot of women still today, at the end of the day, want to have kids and do have kids. So I'm thinking, how does this scenario work for single mothers who choose not to go it alone, but society is not set up to be taking care of all these single parents? Like that's not set up for that. And I think, at least when I look at it that way, I could see, based on what you said, I could see how an argument could be made that if the men around you are not, quote unquote, up to par, or if the men that you can attract are up to par, either you have to raise your market value, quote unquote, or you do it alone. I'm just trying to think how this works for single mothers, for poor women, which a lot of Black women find themselves in that scenario, and they have kids, because that is their experience, and it is, it's a financial challenge. So I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but
I do. So I'm looking at the brother in the chat room.
Okay.
Chris, and he said Detroit has an added layer that if you are a Black man that avoids social issues and has above average or upper income, culturally they find the men unfamiliar. They should. Detroit is not associated with Black men who are high value.
Fair point. Yeah, no, you don't. When you think of Detroit, you don't. The first thing that comes to your mind is not a high value man. I'll leave it at that. Not to say I don't exist, but that's not what Detroit is known for. At least.
So I would have to say, and I'm bringing this back around, Robin, to your question. I'm making it. So for a brother like that, the first question I have is, why are you in Detroit? Why aren't you on the first thing smoking out of there to be around people more like yourself? Now, I want to bring that to your question. So I wrote about this in the book, chapter 4, location, location, location. If Black women want a certain type of lifestyle, they got to go to where the Black men are who can best provide it.
Yeah, I do remember that.
That's not going to happen in Detroit. That's not going to happen in Ohio. That's not going to happen in North Carolina. The interesting, and it almost was a scandal regarding Cynthia G, is that she left one of the most prosperous states in the union when it comes to black men earnings, to go to one of the lowest least prosperous black male states in terms of earnings in North Carolina. Personally, I see this as water seeking its own level. And what's fascinating about the conversation, listening to so many black women, when they talk about, because this has been a staple of black women's conversations for a long time, getting a man on their level. And for whatever reason, in Black American life, we don't talk about data like that, or rarely do. But now
Right.
we have data that's available. We know where the brothers who are doing well are.
Yeah.
Why aren't these sisters moving there? I say it's because again, Cynthia left Washington State to go to North Carolina. Why couldn't she do well with black men in Washington State? Why is that? Tacoma, Seattle. Why couldn't she do well there? Why? Why did she have to go to North Carolina to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, I'll say this. I have family. Granted, this is anecdotal evidence. This is just anecdotal, but I have family who lives in Seattle, and I've heard the same complaint that these black men, they love them some snow bunnies. I've heard this from cousins. Remember, my grandma went there years ago. May her soul rest in peace. And the first comment she made was, she's like, why? She's like, why am I seeing all these? She was so confused. She's from the South, and she was seeing all these interracial couples. She was so confused. She's like, why am I seeing no black family? She was scratching her head. So the complaint I've heard from my different cousins, who live in there, that these black men don't like us. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just giving you some complaints that I've heard from women that I know personally who have grown up there. You got Gen Zs talking about this. You got Gen X. You have the silent generation. These are all different generations of black women complaining about black men not choosing black women. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I know there's truth to that, but I could just tell you my own experience, my family, that's something that's been floating around, and it's not an uncommon plate or a complaint.
Right. So let's look at that. So
okay.
So we know, like, none of us knows your family. You know your family, but none of us do. We've all had a chance to observe. I've had a chance to observe Cynthia G for at least 5 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and you've had a chance to observe her for at least a year or two. I would say most people listening right now have observed her for, we'll split the difference, at least 3 years. I think that's enough time to get a sense of where a person is on a lot of things. Does Cynthia G give you the sense that she would be someone most black men would like?
She hates black men. So no. Who would want to be with somebody who hates them, who calls them the devil, and promotes somebody who literally said black men are Satan? That'd be poison. So no, based upon just the things that she herself has even said.
Yeah. And even aside from the wording, the verbiage, that aside, I'm just talking about now, if I can, the vibe, right? We're not talking about specific words now. We're talking about just the vibe. I'll go ahead and say it because I am a black man. You're not. I'll just go ahead and say it. I don't get the sense that Cynthia G just likes black men, to tell you the truth. She has, and I understand it. I understand where it's coming from. And it's kind of ironic that someone like her, who is educated, who has a degree in psychology, has not taken the steps to address this and resolve it herself. It's pretty clear to me that she has some serious issues emanating from her own father relationship that she has not resolved. And the fact that she's gone across the country to a much blacker state in North Carolina and still can't make it work tells me it's not the issue of the brothers getting with white women in Washington. The issue is Cynthia herself. And that's something that she refuses to address. But here again, makes her very popular because many black women don't want to address themselves. Their view is whatever problems they encounter is outside of themselves and not in themselves. So it's black men, it's racism, sexism, misogynoir, the system, the institutional racism, and so on. She went from Washington State to North Carolina, and the results were the same. And the reason why I wrote that chapter in the book is because I am challenging black women. If what you say is true, then you should have much different results when you move. Or will your results remain the same, like Cynthia G's? Then what?
Well, I think if there's wife culture doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist in the black culture. I was having a conversation with my husband about this too, where you look at other strong cultures, and you mentioned this in your book, right? You look at the Jewish community, Indian community, Chinese community, different communities where even though even if they do, even those cases where there is interracial dating, they still hold on to cultural values, and the culture has very, very, very clear customs and clear beliefs and things as it relates to being a wife, as it relates to raising a family, as it relates to the importance of that. That doesn't really exist in the black community. The pervading voice, as you mentioned earlier in the stream, is single motherhood, baby mamas. That is relatable. Those mothers, those are the voices that are raising up the next generation. So, I think a part of me feels like if you haven't seen it before, how are you going to know any better? So there's that, but also it's like you have to want better, and you have to be willing to want to change. And if you don't want to change, then you're going to have the same result. Which again, to me, which is why I think your last chapter was so telling, because it speaks to the obvious writings of the wall of a generation of women who, if they don't change or refuse to change, are going to get what they get. You know?
Yeah, yeah. The last chapter, you used the word dystopia. It made me laugh. Yeah, the last chapter of the book is kind of going back to Dickens, A Christmas Carol. So we see the last of Ebenezer Scrooge's apparitions is the Grim Reaper, and points to a pretty dystopian possibility for Scrooge. And it kind of scared straight, it does a kind of scared straight thing on him, and it kind of jolts him into it. So that's what I was kind of hoping to do in that last chapter, is kind of do a scared straight on black women on that. And even in the afterward, I kind of touch on that. So yeah, that's the reason why I did it that way. The book was divided up into two chapters, or two sections,
Yeah.
which follows the format of the first book. Whereas in the first book, I took things from brothers from a bird's eye point of view, the macro, and then brought it down to the individual black man level, the micro. With black women, I use the approach of the carrot and then the stick. I'm trying to woo them with the carrot, but some black women don't respond very well to carrots. They respond more they respond better to sticks.
Yeah.
So I had
And
to.
some don't respond at all.
Yeah.
Some just stay right where they are, and
Yeah.
they just dig their heels in. They just stay.
Yeah. So that was kind of my approach to the book, and how I wrote it. And time will tell if it makes a dent or not. We'll see. I'm taking a real big risk and a gamble on it.
No, I hear you. Well, I think to date. Now, granted, like I said, I don't pretend to be the expert, but I think when it comes to just having that accountability, it really just goes back to that, having accountability and finally having somebody who is willing to put that information out there, whether or not you agree with all of the different points or all the different suggestions. Is null and void. I think that the bigger issue is, if you want something, what are you going to do to get it? And I think that that's a really valid question. And at a certain point, it can't be everybody else's problem if you are the common denominator. No matter where you go.
Yeah, that was the basis. I wanted to know what you thought of the chapter in the book. the Swirling Wars. So I did a whole chapter devoted to this, you know, and this is something else that I learned from listening to Black women, but it was an interesting twist though. Again, I'm a big fan of Law and Order, so Law and Order always has these twists in it, you know.
Yeah.
And things don't quite go the way you think, you know what I mean? So that chapter, what I call the Swirling Wars, took up the issue with a lot of Black women, and this again tax back to Cynthia G. The idea, either implicit or explicit, excuse me, either implicit or explicit, that Black women Black women don't do well with Black men. A. B, either will do better off just not being with Black men and just leave it at that. Or C, go to white or non-Black men. So there's that. I was listening to a lot of sisters online, not just YouTube. I mean, Instagrams, Facebook. I was saying, listen, a lot of sisters say that. It's okay. So I got to address this in the book. But what I wanted to do as an interesting twist, that Law and Order twist, that bung bung, that's so I wanted to do that twist was, yeah, but you ladies are saying the same thing that a growing chorus of brothers are now saying, which is SYSBM and Passport, bro. So so now we have, and that's why I called the chapter the Swirling Wars, because now we have a kind of war going on where Black men and Black women are kind of going at each other, online, and using the idea of non-Black men and women to so it's kind of like, if you can imagine this. So you got Black women on one side and they picking up a Brad like a baseball bat, right? It's a Brad baseball bat, right? And then you got Black men on the other side and they're picking up a Bruna, from Brazil, and they picking her up like a baseball bat, and they're kind of like beating each other over the head with Brads and Brunas, if you can imagine that. Yeah. And that's how I kind of looked at it. And that's why I called it the Swirling Wars. Because we have gotten to a point in this Black love dialogue, I guess you could call it, where now Black men and Black women are having a go at each other using other people as proxies. So it's a kind of offshoot of the gender war of sorts.
Yep.
It's like proxy war.
Yeah. It's like racial showcasing.
Yeah.
To me, it's one thing, and I've mentioned this multiple times, and every time I mention it, I always have somebody in the comments who shows me they don't listen, because they say, "Oh, well, I have a white wife, or I have a Black," and it's like, nobody's saying it's an issue if you decide to date and marry out. The issue is always, I think, when you use it as a trophy, or when you start trying to use it as reasons to push narratives against.
Well, weapon. I mean, essentially, you're using it as a weapon, and that's why I call it weaponizing. Wars. Is a wars. We're weaponizing interracial relationships. We're weaponizing it against each other.
Yeah. That to me is the issue. Is the weaponization. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. And that's what it's become. And I think for Black women in particular, that movement that chapter to me was so funny, because no matter how much coverage and news articles, literally, and even academic scholars and writings and YouTube pages and campaigns, all this different stuff going on, Black women talking about why they need to expand their options and why finding non-Black men are the best option for them, we don't see the favors being reciprocated. I have yet to see a movement of white men or Asian men or Hispanic men or any other group of men saying, hey, let's try to find ways to integrate more Black women into our community. You don't see it. So we just look like so desperate. Like I said, men, as women over here talking about swirling and divesting and expanding their options, men are grabbing their passports. So it's like, what are we even talking about? Nobody believes us. We just look desperate. Like, if you did,
I have to push back a little bit on the male side. I have to push back a little bit on the male side.
Okay, well, enlighten me. Let me know what
because I have to say, and again, this is gonna get me in trouble with the party faithful, but
okay.
but yeah. And that's the reason why I called it in the book, The Swirling Wars. In my
Okay.
first book, I was very laudatory of the brothers.
Okay.
Those who decide that they're going to go elsewhere for love. I have no problem with that. And I made that clear in the first book. But in the second book, I had to be honest about the fact that there are a number of brothers who, neither side is really going anywhere like that. And we have evidence to bear that out. As much as a lot of brothers online would like to have everybody believe, the vast majority of black men ain't going nowhere, man. They're just not. They're going to be dealing with black women in this country and vice versa. Now, how we deal with each other is another question, but that's the reality. I think that the idea of interracial relationships is much more important than the reality for a lot of black men and black women online. It's another way to be able to go at the other side. And there are a lot of brothers who shout the most about passport this and passport that. They're the guys I found that do the least.
Oh, interesting. Well,
yeah,
because people who are about it just live it, and they don't see it as like it's their experience. So it's not like some novelty, or it's not something so like they have to show off like a surprise. It's their experience, so it's normal to them.
Yeah. So really, what this really is a kind of is a proxy war. It's an extension of the gender war by proxy. The good news about it, and I wrote 27 chapters and I only devoted one to the swirling issue. The good news is that it's a very small front on a gender war that is, and I consider to be over, but in any event is ramping down, winding down, not ramping up. So you have a small group of black folks on both sides, kind of going after each other, and they tend to make a lot of noise online, but in reality they have very little, point of fact. The fight, to the extent there is one, is still going to be between black men and black women, and how we are going to live together. And that's really where it all comes down to. And
Right.
yeah, that's really what it all comes down to.
Right. Now I kind of want to circle back briefly to the point that you made earlier. And also real quick, I did see this came back a while back, but better you, I do appreciate the super chat. It says, in my opinion, it's because some women don't want to take responsibility. Weight is a product of what we put in our body. Popeyes is a hell of a drug. I know that came through a while back. Guys, if you're here, hit that like button. Also, show support to the show. You can find me on CASHAPP or VENMO, Chez, Chardé. Support your favorite content creators. Also, as always, I will be sure to acknowledge and read all super chats. So going back to the point that you made earlier about,
can I respond to Better You?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then we can go to your point. So okay. Better You make a really good point. I talked about this in the book on rules for big girls. I said, listen, if you're going to be a big girl, if you're going to be a big attractive girl, and I used Letitia Thomas, Denise Bidot, Tabria Major, plus size models, they can be your kind of guiding star. If that's where you're at with it, then you're going to have to, make some changes. You can't eat just whatever you want. It's probably going to mean, at the very least, a fish and veggies type of diet, if not just flat out plant-based. That's one of the consequences. Because, you're a big girl, but you still want to be shapely. That's the price. That's one of the prices you pay. Now, how many black women do you know that's either fish and veggies or just straight up plant-based? I happen to know quite a few, and I only know of one that I know for certain is that way, and that's Miss Brown Sugar. So,
vegetarian or vegan?
She started out with that, but she slipped into the fish and veggie part of it.
Oh, pescatarian. Yeah. I tried to be vegan for because I know a lady I know randomly. She won Iron Chef. She's like a well-known, or she's a award-winning plant-based chef. So I worked with her a couple of times. Total Bay Area thing. You find all kinds of plant-based stuff up here. I just was so hungry though, so I had to add in meat in my diet. But I do understand what you're saying about ultimately, if you want to be healthy, it is very much an active approach. It doesn't just kind of happen.
Yeah.
So
that's and it goes to Better You's point. And if you're going to be a sister that's going to be plus size, and you still want to be shapely to get the guys and all the rest of it, you're gonna have to be willing to, to make some very real changes in your lifestyle. And I talk about that in that chapter in the book. But you were saying you wanted to make another point.
Yeah, I wanted to go back just briefly to what you were talking about. I know you said you caught flack for this from the different men, where you were basically saying that for lack of a better term, your rank and file, your average black woman who complain about quote unquote average black men have a point. I know you also mentioned them, call them blue Henrys. These are guys who some of them do make into six figures. I know truck drivers who make very, very, very good money. Now they may not be considered in the same social status as, say, an engineer or a doctor, but it's like they still make really, really good money. But you're saying, nevertheless, women who complain about the blue Henrys of the world have a point, and they are better off, although financially they face more struggles doing it alone. I want to make sure I understand your point, because, like I said, this is probably the first I've heard this, and I'm still, granted, I'm not in the position, but I'm still trying to wrap my brain around the fact of how it was like, let's say I was a single mother that made $36K a year, right? And I was taking care of a kid, how that would be a better option versus me, working with a good blue collar guy. Because
that's the trick. See, that's the trick. The assumption on the brother's side is that every blue collar guy is a good blue collar guy. And black women are saying, they're not saying it explicitly, but implicitly they're saying the exact opposite. Every blue collar brother ain't a good blue collar brother.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's common sense. Nobody's just, you're going to find good and bad individuals in all social classes and all economic and all jobs. Like, to me, that's not controversial. You're going to find great blue collar men. You're going to find some who are dusties. You'll find men who make a lot of money. You talked about this, even the F boys, some of the F boys who are really wealthy, but they have all the behaviors that women complain about in the blue Henrys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So yeah, it's a complex question, because there's something else that that is kind of on the periphery of the black love conversation, and I'm hoping that the Black Manosphere can make an impact on this. There are a lot of good people out there that you just don't want to, bump bellies with.
Right.
Which becomes a very important consideration in a relationship.
Fair.
So there's a lot of, my point in this is saying that there's a lot of moving parts that we're not considering here. And some of those moving parts are going to be a bit uncomfortable for some guys to hear. But if we're attempting to move toward a more productive conversation, then those things have to be considered. Another thing that's a big stumbling block for a lot of brothers, or not, I don't want to use that word. That's a bad word. Scratch that. Another area of concern for a lot of brothers is the fact that, for whatever reason, many black women wind up with guys that would not be considered in polite society to be good guys. And they often reproduce with them. And then they want to raise their standards. And then they want guys who would be considered in polite society to be good guys, and then want to get with them. So this is the reason why the Russell and Sierra thing just it never dies. Because for a lot of black men, it's the only way I can describe it, to give a visceral image of this, is being slapped in the face. And black women really don't have a satisfactory comeback for that. They're advocates in the form of black love experts, the overwhelming majority of them black men, many of them being those bad guys, so to speak. And I talk about this in the very first chapter of the book, the formula. They don't have a satisfactory comeback for that. And it's going to be very difficult for guys to kind of come to the middle on this, so long as this issue just keeps hanging out there and is not meaningfully addressed.
Very interesting. Now, another question. I mean, just your thoughts. I mean, if more just the quote unquote average people were willing to get together and marry, just average, people, because it used to be a time that, hey, if you worked at the post office as a woman and you met a guy who worked at the post office and he had good character, you would marry. It wouldn't be all as difficult. Now, I think, with social media and women having more access to different things and marketing and all that, that's not necessarily good enough. And I just wonder, in theory, if we existed in a society where, you know, more average people just got together and they were okay with maybe not necessarily trying to aspire to being flued out, but they were happy within their means, if that would change things, or if that's just no longer possible. Well, it's no longer possible that, in at least in the context of America, you're going to see average women being willing to be with average men or men on their level, water seeking its own level. You're not going to see that. You're instead going to see women do it alone, complain about men, or maybe some of them will get into rotation and be happy with that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know your thoughts on that.
In fact, I was going to call the chapter "She Watched Channel Zero." It was some people may know about this. The hip hop group Public Enemy, back in the latter '80s, came
Uh-huh.
out with a song called "She Watched Channel Zero," and I kind of got the idea from that about how susceptible Black women are to, television and today social media messaging,
Hmm.
and if they're not careful, they can kind of be kind of hoodwinked.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
absolutely.
into thinking that life actually works this way. So see, okay, so for a lot of Black women, and this is going to sound kind of bad, for a lot of Black women, life is kind of dismal, to tell you the truth. I used to want, and I was doing my research on the book, I would wonder why so many Black women would spend so much time talking about traveling. And many of these Black women were, I was privy to one conversation on Facebook between Black women, and they gave the 411 the skinny on how they actually shared how the sausage is made as to how they do these trips.
The trips, yes.
and
I remember
and
you talking about this. Yeah.
how they actually save up, how they actually finance it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it was four or five women to a room, Groupon coupon type things, and early bird specials. So they really, because these women didn't have the means, just flat out just get on, hop a flight, go away. So clearly they're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul to do these trips. And I'm saying to myself, I'm sitting there looking at my computer. I'm like, women, why are Black women going to such great lengths to travel? Why does that mean so much to them? And the answer is because for most Black women, life is pretty dismal. Your day-to-day life is not interesting at all. Your day-to-day life is pretty, not just mundane or boring or tedious, but dismal. Most Black women don't live in the major American cities like that. What I mean by that is, over 50%. New York City, and this is Black men and Black women together, they make up max 25%, if that, of the city population of like 8 million. We know the situation in LA. You're in San Francisco, there's like maybe 12 Black people there. You get where I'm going with this.
Well, you go to
Um,
Oakland, you see it, but I mean that's a whole other conversation. A whole other conversation.
exactly. You know exactly what I mean. The Black Panther movie opens in Oakland, right? So you get where I'm going with this. For most Black people, most Black women in the country, day-to-day life is pretty dismal. It makes sense as to why they would want at least a momentary escape from that.
It's like a hope dope, or like
Yeah,
a drug.
yeah.
It's their drug. It's their fantasy. It's like what gives them relief from the chaos of their life, which is I mean, if you break it down that way, that's quite sad. I would think you would want to live real life and find ways to improve it, which is why I would always boggle my mind when anytime you have a conversation that would be constructive and actually lead to better or more meaningful results, why that could be seen as so offensive. But if you put it that way, if you're already in so much pain or so much chaos or so much, however you define it,
and not even the and it's not even the thing about chaos and pain, although it is that. But even if you with the control for that, so there's not so much chaos and pain, but just the I don't want to use the word ennui. I don't know if I would use that, or entropy. I don't want to use that. But just the monotony, like I said, dismal. You think about life in Birmingham, Alabama, right? And you're not on the north side.
Fair.
Right? You think about life in Little Rock, Arkansas. You think about life in St. Louis.
Yeah.
You think about life in Newark. You think about life in, Baton Rouge. This is where the majority of Black women are. Even in Atlanta, they're not in Buckhead. The vast majority of Black women in Atlanta are not in Buckhead.
No.
They're more like East Point. So it kind of makes sense why social media, reality TV, travel, it kind of makes sense why, that whole thing is so pervasive. Because when you really think about it, and for all the talk today about the need for men in general, Black men in particular, to explore an inner life, what I find is that there's quite a bit of vapidity in a lot of Black women's own inner lives, and it's pretty profound.
I mean, when you put it that way, I mean, everything that you mentioned before as to why Cynthia G is so relatable, to why there is, to a certain extent, a need for there to be a industry of fantasy. Because if bad results are being produced and there is no resolution or no willingness to really look at a hard look at there being a resolution, then the only option is to just find ways to cope with your current situation. And that's quite sad. like I said, that's quite sad. But there's a lot of women who do choose that. They do choose to stay that route.
Yeah, you have to consider the Black men who are also in Baton Rouge and Newark and Little Rock, Arkansas, in the south side of Birmingham, and the south side of Chicago, and the south side of Atlanta. These are the men that these ladies have to choose among. And and again, I understand where my brothers are coming from, but I'm just trying to get them to take a step out of themselves for a minute. The pickings ain't great. And we can make a case that, water's seeking its own level and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I'm just simply saying I can understand where they're coming from. I can dig it.
Okay.
I can dig it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that the brothers are bad people. I'm just simply saying I can see where they're coming from, given, taking the time to kind of really study this stuff with a book and kind of really thinking about it and doing a lot of listening and whatnot. Yeah, I can understand why a lot of Black women have the view that they do, because for a lot of Black women, life is just not that interesting. It's rather dismal, to tell you the truth. And many of the Black men that they have to choose from, it kind of adds to to the dismal outlook to some extent. So
I mean, if you put it that way, which is why I understand your point of like, at a certain point in your life, you get to look in the mirror and basically try to take the action steps necessary to get the results that you want. So, for example, if you're a woman and you do want a healthy marriage and a long-term marriage with a partner that you find is up to par, then what are you willing to do to get to the place where you find that person? Whether that's relocating, whether that's getting yourself in the best shape possible, whether that's, modifying your appearance a bit, whatever it may be to get the results that you want. Are you willing to do that? And I think that is something that really, quite frankly, anybody and everybody should know, man or woman.
Yeah.
And I do understand if you're not willing to do that and you just kind of want to go the path of least resistance, how that might lead you to choices that are just not the best.
Yeah. I
So
was I was I was yeah, the stuff that I couldn't get into the book, like we just got finished talking about the traveling piece and its significance. All of those things I wanted to write about and didn't have a chance to get to. And depending on how things go with this book, I'll come back and pick up on all those
yeah,
different strands that I didn't have a chance to pick up on. But yeah, that travel piece really it really gave me a powerful insight into the daily lives of a lot of black women in a way that I don't think a lot of my brothers really think about. And I think we would do well to give a bit of thought to that. And I know that that's going to come as there's going to be some brothers that's going to have problems with that. They're going to see that as borderline pandering and I get it. A lot of brothers feel that they're under the gun. We just had this situation with, and you talked about it. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people have talked about the black TikTok therapist.
right.
And my point in bringing it up is because I understand that situation drives home why so many black men have a bunker mentality.
Right.
Okay. It's justifiable. It's real. And if there is going to be any real lasting movement of the needle on that point, we're going to have to take black men's concerns and trepidation seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that there were black women who stood up and had this lady removed from her post.
Yeah.
And I want to remind my brothers, because many of them will never admit because it's not safe for them to do so, to admit that they have been, talking about the weaponization that both sides, to be fair, do, but talking about black women. Black women have weaponized this idea, this question, and I know we've heard this. So black man will be airing out his grievances, and the black woman will invariably ask, "Who hurt you?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember Kevin one night. I don't know if you saw this. I remember Kevin one evening having a conversation with her sister, and I believe the context of the conversation was, "Why don't black women smile at black men?" I believe
I
that.
remember that conversation.
I believe. So he was having a conversation with his sister on that conversation, and they're kind of going back and forth. And at one point in the conversation, the sister says to Kevin, "Who hurt you?" And without skipping a beat, Kevin said, "You did." Now, what he means is obviously he doesn't know this woman personally. What he's saying is, you know, black women have hurt black men. And that plays a role in what's going on right now. And that situation with the black TikTok therapist just brought out a whole lot of stuff that black men have, not only with what she as a black woman was doing, but by extension, the long history, excuse me, in this country of mistreatment of black men in their most vulnerable state in terms of healthcare. And it explains why black men act the way that they do. So I say all of that to say that I am very sensitive and empathetic with my brothers, and I understand when they sometimes lash out at me and see me as something of a traitor or, I understand it. I understand where it's coming from. but we have not yet gotten to a point, and that's why I bring up the Black TikTok therapist debacle. We have not yet gotten to a point where it is safe for Black men to talk about being hurt by Black women, which is just not safe to
We
do.
just haven't. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think that's a whole other conversation in itself. But I will say this. I do think that we could have, in an ideal scenario, there would be more empathy for both sides, because both men and women have been hurt. Obviously, it's like, this is, nobody would have the amount of vitriol or tension between the genders if there weren't legitimate reasons. Now we can argue that, okay, there's delusion here and there's entitlement. We can argue for that, and that also does exist. But I think there has to be an understanding that, like, yeah, on both sides, on some level, there has obviously been hurt. And I think being a bit more empathetic, this is something that I talk about a lot on my channel, is at least trying to understand, instead of being so quick to be defensive or being so quick to write someone off. At least try to understand where they're coming from, because lo and behold, you might learn something, or you might find out that, hey, maybe they are right, or maybe there is an area where you can improve.
Yeah.
But if you just are so quick to silence anything that is remotely constructive, or silence anything that just doesn't fit within your perfect narrative, then it's like, you're never going to grow. No, nothing around you is ever going to grow, and there's not going to be any change.
Yeah.
So
it's you make a really good point, because so I've and this is part of the arc of the book. So when the book for the ladies came out, many of the brothers in the Black Manosphere saw that as me selling out. Okay. Even despite the fact that I had just did the book for them, despite the fact that I was gearing up to do a second event for Black men, but even that was seen as a kind of at the very least capitulation to, if not selling out to, Black women. Because unlike the first event where no Black women were present, the second event, Black women were under certain conditions. They weren't sitting in the actual sessions where we had with Black men, but socializing parts of it, women were present. And that was seen as a kind of selling out. And that's unfortunate.
It is.
But I get where it's coming from. A lot of the Black Manosphere, and there have been people on the outside looking in who make the observation, a lot of these guys have problems with women, and in a very real sense, they're right, but not in the way that they think. They characterize it as these guys are just losers, and that's a big part of the problem. And many, not all of it, but much of it coming from Black women observers on the outside looking in. That's the wrong way to look at it, because we could say the same thing on the opposite side. And I'm going to your point about the both sides argument. I've noticed more and more, just listening to Black women, I've noticed as the Black Manosphere continues its rise in relevancy in the social media environment, in setting the conversation for things, particularly Kevin's impact and so forth. I'm noticing more Black women are saying both sides. Both sides. It's both sides. It's both sides. Now, which is interesting to me, because when Black women had the dais pretty much to themselves, the entire, what I refer to as the Black love machine to itself, there was no interest in parity. Black men were seen as, at best, a role player. For all the talk that Black women have about being an equal partner and stuff like that, they don't see Black men as equal partners. Mm-hmm. Black men were kind of on the periphery, and they were the stars of the show. If you look at these reality shows, and these reality shows are not catering to Black men, they're catering to Black women.
Yeah.
If you look at these reality shows, they're the stars of the show. And the Black men are kind of like, satellites. They're not equal partners. There's one show called Married to Medicine. My lady friend turned me on to this. Married to Medicine. And it features, it talks about the life and times, and not all of the women are doctors, but most of them are. Doctors, dentists, you get the idea, OBGYN, and so forth. And But most of these women aren't married to their male counterpart. There's like maybe one or two. And it's clear that they're the stars of the show and the guys are kind of like on the periphery. And that format pretty much follows all of the reality shows that are aimed, Love and Hip Hop. Love and Hip Hop ain't about, you would think, you say, well, Stevie J. No, it's not about Stevie J. It's more about Jocelyn. And Stevie J just happens to play he's a bigger than usual bit part, but a bit part nonetheless. My point is that it's kind of ironic to listen to these ladies now that the Black Manosphere, as imperfect as it is, as imperfect as I am, as imperfect as Kevin was, nevertheless breaking through and making an impact and making a real contribution to the conversation. That it's interesting now that these ladies kind of switch up and talk about it's both sides, when for so long there was only one side. And what I'm saying is that it comes across as insincere. It comes across as just trying to shut brothers down. And we're not going to get anywhere that way. Black women are going to have to be willing to hear some very uncomfortable things from black men. That being said, black men are going to have to be willing to hear some very uncomfortable things from black women. The only way out is through here.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like I said, I could not agree more. Anytime you talk to anybody about whether it's because a lot of women are about talk about whether they're about it is different, but they talk about self-help and manifestation and living your best life or whatever. Anybody who's really serious about that understands that aspect of that is actually facing the darker aspects of yourself, and that requires radical honesty. Radical honesty, and without that, then like I said, you're not going to be able to move the needle. And usually when you have to be honest with yourself, that means you're going to have to address not so good aspects of your character, maybe, or things where you've just been flat out wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to acknowledge TJ Hana for 4.99 on the super chat. I appreciate you. I see. Okay, for the past 10 years of the internet, we've been able to express our thoughts outside normal spots for black men. In the end, some cats opt out.
Yeah.
Makes sense. It
Yeah,
makes sense.
some brothers do opt out. Yeah, it's true. It's there's a brother in the chat room. He didn't put it in super chat. There's a brother by the name of Lord Juno.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been very expressive in the chat room over the course of our conversation. And he makes a case that he says he agrees with a lot of what I'm saying, but a lot of my he says, but a lot of my message comes across as fence sitting on the fence. And he says that's what a lot of the guys, get turned off about me about. And that's interesting because I don't think anybody would accuse me of being kind of a middle of the roader. If anything, I'm often typecast as a pretty extreme. Some people even describe me in extremist terms. So it's kind of interesting for him to kind of paint me as this fence-sitting moderate now. It's kind of interesting. I think what really bothered a lot of brothers, like I said, the book for the ladies that we're talking about right now, that bothered a lot of brothers. And to tell you the truth, I think what bothered a lot of brothers, and I want to talk to you about this, get your sense of it. I think a lot of brothers, to the extent that you're willing and able, I think what bothered a lot of brothers like a Lord Juno is that I actually have a life outside of talking about BFF, to tell you the truth. That I actually have a woman in my life, that I actually have a life with her, that she actually likes me. I think that was kind of a shock to a lot of brothers, even though I had been talking about her for years. But it
Right.
was interesting. I don't know if you're aware of this. Bernard Riley, and you can see this on my channel. We had an interview, so you can see this for yourself. He even said he did not think that Miss Brown Sugar really existed. He thought that he honestly believed that I made her up.
I remember. I think I listened to one of your recent lives, and you brought that up.
And it's fascinating that he would say something like that because we work together. And so he's not just somebody just listening to me, from afar. And I'm sitting to myself thinking, if a brother that's that close to me thinks that, then is it unreasonable to think that so many other brothers out there think the same thing?
Probably.
And then the question becomes, why do so many brothers need to believe that I'm making this up? And number one. And number two, why would it bother them so much when it would come out? Like I was listening to one, I'm not going to say the name here, but I was listening to one, I'll never forget. I was listening to one conversation. The brothers get together and it's kind of like a de facto barbershop type of deal. And they're getting together and the conversation for an hour was me and Miss Brown Sugar. And, what, where did that come from? We need to know more about her. How come we ain't seen no full length pictures of her? Why isn't he never married to her? What else? And one of the guys at one point said, "Listen, man," he said to the host, he said, "Listen, man, look, I know that you're not crazy about Obsidian, but you're just going to have to admit that what you thought you knew about the guy just ain't true. Okay, you're just going to have to get over it." But what's fascinating to me was that it was so. They had such an intense conversation about this. I'm sitting there like, yeah, when Bernard said that he thought I was making her up, that's a real thing. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a serious disconnect here. What are brothers hearing? When they hear me speaking, what are they hearing? Because it's clear that what I'm saying and what they're hearing are two very different things.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different conversation. People tend to hear through their own filters, based upon their own preconceived notions, based upon their own understanding. I mean, no one really hears the same thing. All we have to do is play the age-old game telephone and understand that. We can all be hearing the same thing and come to different results. So it is what it is. I mean, you probably know this more than anyone that you're never going to be able to please everybody. It's impossible for that to be the case. It's just simply not going to happen.
Yeah.
But
it really if I may be so bold to say, it really does cast into stark relief where we are. Like, I said earlier,
yeah,
that a lot of Black women can relate to a Cynthia G. And I understand why Cynthia G exists. That does not mean I endorse it. Does not mean I condone it. Does not mean that I endorse it. But I understand it. And I've been giving a lot of thought to. A lot of brothers see me as kind of abandoning the everyday brother in my change up of appearance. They kind of see me as abandoning. In a lot of ways, a lot of brothers see me as a kind of abandoning them. And I can understand that too, because in a lot of ways, a lot of brothers can relate to a guy who they see as almost a flip side of Cynthia G in a way. And I was never that. But a lot of brothers kind of see it that way. And that's kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, it's kind of disturbing and kind of sad.
I hear you.
I hear you. It is
So
kind of where we are with at this point in the conversation. We truly do have a conversation now. Black men and black women are talking to each other. We're living proof of that right now. That there was a time in Black American life when that was not the case, meaning in terms of media, meaning in terms of the Black love conversation. It was just a small group of Black men who were pretty much hand selected by Black women to be essentially tell them what they want to hear. That era is over. Now you're having Black men rank and file. I consider myself one of them, speaking with Black women rank and file, and now we're having a conversation in earnest. So with that being said, where do you see, or maybe you don't see it that way? Where do you see things heading from here?
well,
We're in the post Kevin Samuels era.
well,
Kevin Samuels is gone.
No, absolutely.
Where do we go from here?
Absolutely. So I'll give you my thoughts, and then I will have to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Well, the next few minutes. But I would say, within the post Kevin Samuels era, I think it really comes down to choice. Okay, the way I see it is, I believe there's always gonna be a group of women and or men who want to be productive and who want to be right. And so I tend to want to focus my energies on that and making connections with that. But with that said, I also don't know that I'm convinced that that's going to be the majority. You mentioned this even in your book, where it's like there are certain things that have been set in stone that are almost irreversible. And it's not irreversible necessarily because there couldn't be things that are done to make it change, but because there seems to be a lack of willingness to collaborate in ways that would force that to work. So to me, I'm like, unless there is a drastic 180-degree change in the collective of modern women, period, and men to a certain extent, unless there is a 180-degree change and there is a real coming to the table and saying, okay, how can we actually work together? How can we support one another? How can we, you're talking not just in relationships, but then if you want to talk about community building, I mean, there are things that come into that, like businesses, economies, education. You know what I mean? There's always complaints about Eurocentric beauty standards and media representation. It's like, okay, well, are you going to be willing to build your own? There's a reason that, the Chinese and Indians and Hindus have their own school and they have their own movies. Like, this is what community does.
Yeah.
But unless there is a willingness to even come back to the table and say, okay, men and women see each other as valuable and they're willing to work together, I don't see that happening. I see at best a couple of things here and there. But as far as, Black America, I hate to be dystopian, but I don't ever see what it once was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if Black culture a couple of decades from now, if Black communities were, you started to see more of the influence from maybe immigrants who came in and already had a strong culture in place, or quite frankly, if Black America looks more mixed. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to say for sure, but like I said, if you have women who are saying everything from abort Black male babies to people who are dying alone and not having kids and being okay with that, and there doesn't seem to be a huge push for marriage, that is the natural byproduct. It's a declining culture, and other cultures that are having tons of babies and still getting married and still practicing their customs, them existing and them creating and bringing their culture. So yeah. I could be wrong, but I'm saying unless there is a drastic turnaround, to me that seems like it's going to be the natural progression of things.
Yeah, which kind of brings us back to the dystopian, what you call my dystopian end chapter of the book. So yeah, that is definitely one possibility. Another possibility is that we can all kind of look at this special moment in time and just try listening to each other. I think that's the single biggest takeaway personally from me with this book is the listening. Did a lot of listening to Black women and learned a lot. And I think that would be the single biggest. If I was asked, what would I say to Black men? coming out of this experience writing this book for Black women, that will be the big takeaway, is to be really good listeners. Because Black women talk a lot. Black women, the great thing about Black women is that they are not, shrinking violets. They are very expressive, and they have a lot to say.
Definitely.
And so you have a lot of room to work with. And even the things that are more shrill, nevertheless give you a lot to work with. And that's one of the big takeaways in doing the research for this book, is that I had a lot of time to go through a lot of social media, including YouTube, and just listen to the things Black women were saying. And I learned a whole lot. I learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I hope, I hope for things to do and be better. And, this is why I'm here having this conversation with you and having these conversations in general, because like I said, I always do believe that there's a remnant, there's people who are willing to try to be the change or try to find solutions. I believe that. It's just a matter of, okay, well, what is that going to look like? And at this point, I'm not trying to predict or assume that it's going to look a particular way. I think some of that's going to depend upon just how the nation in general progresses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of which we have a kind of love-hate relationship there. So right. Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and this has been a heck of a conversation, I must say. No surprise, because you're doing really, really great work, and I would remind brothers that when sisters like you come along, we need to really pump them up, because sisters like you don't come along very often. At the risk of blowing your head up, sisters like you don't come very often, and so when they do, we have to really pump them up, and I do. So I want to thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. It was always a pleasure. And as always, guys, I saw a few people be in there. Please be, and I'll always say this, please try to be respectful. I see most of you guys were respectful throughout the chat, so I appreciate that. But I'm just saying, guys, in general, rules of the house, if I have a guest on here, please be respectful. Even if you don't agree with them, that's okay. Just try to do it in a way that is still honoring to who they are as a person.
It's funny. I'm glad you said that. If I can say it really quickly, the brothers, and some sisters who say things that would be considered impolite, I still consider it valuable for this reason. So for example, there was one brother in the chat room who said, nobody cares about your over the hill lady, and so on. So she hit the wall. Okay, well, if that's true, then why is everybody talking about her? Why did I just got finished relaying an anecdote of a brother on another channel with a full panel of Black men, and they spent over an hour talking about it? If everything is what you're saying is true, why would they do that? Why would they devote bandwidth and time to that if what you're saying is true? Why?
I don't know. I mean, I've never personally met Miss Brown Sugar, but she seems like a lovely woman. So I don't understand what the need. Honestly, to me, it just sounds, and this is where sometimes I think the YouTube space can be really petty. And I try hard not to get into petty discussions, because just in my own personal life, I don't like being around that. I find it exhausting. But as soon as you get to me, the shame, insults, guilt, all that, it's like you're kind of moving away from the bigger picture. And usually what that shows me is that maybe there's been a nerve that's been struck, somebody's been offended, something has happened to ruffle the feathers, and instead of just attacking it head on or feeling like there's a valid point to raise, you just resort to insulting, because it's somewhat of a reactive response.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just the way that I look at it. And I'm never, that I never try to exist in an echo chamber. I think everybody can and should have their position to share. Even if they don't agree with me, that's fine. I just try to make sure that it's done with decency in class, because unfortunately, we just don't see that in YouTube a lot, and that's fine. But I still think we can be adults and be respectful, because it's like people going to work. If you ever worked in a corporate space or ever been around professional people or other people in general, other ethnic groups, you don't go around doing this whole crab in the barrel bucket kind of mentality. You act like adults that have common sense. So I'm like, we can do that and still have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think of this idea? Because there's a brother, and I know we gotta wrap up, but there's a brother here who says It seems like Chez and well, what he means is Chardé. Brothers, Chez is French. It means when somebody ChezCharde, it means from the house of Chardé.
Yeah, it actually does mean that.
And it's French. And maybe it's not her name. Chez means house.
Yes, it's like at her house, like so
Yeah.
at Chardé's place. Kind of thing.
So Chez is not her name. Chardé is her name. So when
Mhm.
she says ChezCharde, she means from the house of Chardé. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So he says, seems like Chardé and Mumia are too scared to say it's over for most boomer and millennial black women and men. There is no change coming any soon, gentlemen. It's time to call it, doctor. Now, that's interesting because that's not what the statistics tell us. That's not what the data tell us. So this is back to what we was talking about in the beginning. Black people don't really look at data and statistics. They don't. They have their own reasons for kind of disregarding that. They instead go by their own personal lived experience. So what I would say to the brother, I'll be interested in hear what your take on this. What I would say to the brother is maybe that's your personal lived experience for you, brother. And I'm not here to tell you that's good or bad. But what I will tell you is that hasn't been my personal lived experience. And that has not been the personal lived experience of the black people I know. And that hasn't been reflected in the data. So I would invite you to consider what in your personal life leads you to that conclusion. What do you think, Chardé?
Really, really interesting point. Let me see. Let me go back over it. Yeah, as I said before, I absolutely believe that there will be change for sure. There will be change. I think the question is, okay, what is that change going to look like? I don't believe an entire community of people is just downright corrupt. I don't believe that. I never believe that because I'm like, now you're getting into just my humble opinion. You're getting into weird kind of mindsets that led to the Hitlers of the world, for lack of a better term. You know, if you just say, "Oh, this entire community is just bad," like I don't believe that. So even if we can talk about all the woes that negatively impact the Black community and things of that nature, there are still good and lovely Black men and women out there who are getting together and dating and married and being productive. That does happen. Now, the question to me is, okay, well, what is that change going to look like? And I do believe that there is going to be change. Black America 50 years from now, I think is going to look a lot different than Black America today. I can't say I know what that looks like. I just know that for me personally, I want to do my part to try to make sure I'm adding to productive change and connecting with the people who are like-minded. I don't have all the answers today. You know, a year or two from now, I may know better, do better, may be able to speak more clearly on this. But, you know, that's the best way I would answer it based upon what I know currently.
Maybe we need to come back and kind of pick up where we left off and do another round. But I deeply appreciate doing this. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, anytime.
And, we kind of did our own version of C-SPAN in depth here.
Yeah. Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate
Fun stuff. Well, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, you have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Hey guys, so thanks for hanging out with me. That was a fun combo. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button. Share this with someone that you think might find it interesting. As always, show support to the show. Also, stay tuned for other upcoming content. And also subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't, so you guys are notified anytime I go live or a video drops. And thanks for hanging out, everybody. Thanks for hanging out, sharing your opinion. Thank you for those of you who are showing support. Also, if you haven't already, you can become a channel member for as little as $4.99. Support the show. Like I said, there are special channel membership perks. We'd love to hang with you. We are a nice, small knit community over there. So, yeah, become a channel member or share all that different stuff. And thanks for hanging out. And guys, we'll talk later. Okay, bye.